please. Ready? No excuses. No excuses. Oh, where's Giselle? Okay, we wait for Giselle. Things do not proceed without her. She comes. Okay. Now I can call the meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to the November 5th, 2018 meeting of the Planning Commission. Tonight's agenda contains two items. First, we have an information item on the Community Energy Plan update. The Community Energy Plan was adopted in 2013, as you will hear, and it's one of the 11 elements of our comp plan. The plan lays out the goals, strategy, and tools to meet Arlington's carbon emissions target of 3 metric tons. That's equivalent to what Copenhagen does. They are the lowest emitter in the world, the lowest city emitter in the world. Tonight we'll hear about the 5-year update of the plan, and the update accounts for new information and new technologies that might get us to our goal more quickly. Our second item for tonight consists of a use permit for a new elementary school at the Reed School. If you would like to speak on an issue, an item tonight, please be sure to turn your speaker slip into our clerk, Ms. Johnson, before the item is called. When the time comes, she will call your names 2 by 2, and when you hear your name called, come to the podium in the order your name has been called. All Planning Commission meetings are video and audio taped. I think that's still true. We had a little glitch once, but we're back on track, audio and video. When it is your turn to speak, please speak clearly into the microphone and keep your cell phones turned off now and away from the microphones, as there can be feedback. So with that, Madam Clerk, will you please call the first item?
Our first item is on the Community Energy Plan update. This is an informational item only. And we have Richard Dooley, our DES staff, to present this item this evening.
Good evening, Mr. Dooley. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the commission members for your time tonight, giving me the opportunity to brief you on the Community Energy Plan and the update of that plan. I'll go through the slides rather quickly. We can go back to them if there are questions regarding any of them. I am the Community Energy Coordinator, part of the Arlington Initiative to Rethink Energy team, or also known as just the Rethink Energy team as part of DES. Our team is charged with helping to implement the Community Energy Plan, but we work together with all departments throughout the county as well as stakeholders in the community to go ahead and to implement that plan. I mention that because the latest greenhouse gas emissions inventory shows us that our county activities and processes only contribute less than 4% to the overall greenhouse gas emissions, meaning that the community is the rest of it, north of 96%. So it's important for us to work across the board internally with our other departments as well as externally with all the stakeholders to get the work done that needs to be done to reach our goals. So there you have the essence of what the Community Energy Plan is, and our AIR team is working, as I'd mentioned, on a number of different initiatives. There's just a couple listed there that we will elaborate on during the presentation tonight. Green Building Density Incentive Program that you're likely aware of through the various site plans that come through here. Green Home Choice, our solar co-op, as well as the Energy Lending Library, which just recently won a state award on that Energy Lending Library. So back in 2010 through 2013, when we were developing the Community Energy Plan, we recognized the importance of smart growth with good land use and transportation policies, and we were layering on energy planning onto that, those two layers of land use as well as transportation planning. And we figured that that was probably a nice way to segue to say that this is a plan that looks out to the year 2050. And thinking back to what happened back in the 60s and 70s, we are reaping the benefits of that forward thinking and that planning process that went back 40 plus years. So we're trying to set the stage for good energy planning now, implementing that, and having a wonderful energy future as we look ahead to 2050. The reasons why we created the energy plan in the first place, well, this insatiable appetite, not only in Arlington but throughout the world, for more and more energy. This is a graph showing energy use over time, and that steep curve that you see toward the year 2000 continues unabated as we head through the 2000s. And so it is forecast that the energy use will double by the year 2030 compared to the year 2000. There are three primary elements to the Community Energy Plan on which it is based. Number one is energy security. We can't necessarily predict the storms that are to come through here, the next derecho that will hit, and other unforeseen circumstances, be them natural or man-made. And so it's important for us to make sure that we have security on our grid, in our power grid, and to make sure that in the event that there is a power outage, we're able to turn the lights back on and get the power back on to continue to be productive, whether it's in businesses or in the residential sector as well. The second element is economic competitiveness. We want to make sure that we stay competitive moving on into the future, and that we continue to increase that competitiveness throughout the region as well as throughout the country and the world. And so we do that through reducing our energy prices as well as insulating ourselves from any hiccups that create energy price increases around the world due to things happening in places like the Middle East or elsewhere. These are things that we can't necessarily dictate. They're kind of given to us, and so we have to react to them. And so it's best for us to be efficient with our energy use, and that will help us to be economically competitive moving forward. And then last but not least is environmental commitment. We have an overall, as Madam Chair, you mentioned, the greenhouse gas emissions goal of 3.0 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per capita per year. That is our goal for 2050. And I'm going to show you a graph later on in this presentation that shows that we are on our way toward that. We're making good progress, but this is no day to be complacent, as reports from the others around the world have shown that we have a long road ahead of us to try to meet not only our community goals, but our worldwide goals when it comes to dealing with climate change. The energy plan, adopted back in June of 2013, has 6 different goal areas. They are listed there. The one on the far left-hand side of the screen is probably the one, those buildings are probably of most interest to this group, but also we have a number of other ones that have interplay with the work that you do. We advance and advocate for more use of renewable energy, and there you see transportation also listed there, trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, and we work together closely with our Transportation Bureau in order to make sure that the Master Transportation Plan and the Community Energy Plan are working together toward the community's goals. So with efficient buildings, we have a number of different initiatives that help us to increase the energy and operational efficiency of those buildings. We had a rebate program that was discontinued, but while it was happening, it was quite active. People were taking advantage of it to add insulation to their homes, to weatherize their homes, increase the energy efficiency of their furnaces and of their air conditioning equipment. And so it was quite successful. And so we look forward to the potential for reinvigorating that on into the future. Helen Reineke-Wilt on our team runs the Green Home Choice program. That program allows for people to put on additions onto their homes and renovate their homes and do it in an environmentally friendly manner. And so that deals with indoor air quality as well as energy efficiency. And that has been a very heavily subscribed program, and they really enjoy the technical expertise that the AIR staff provide to the community for that effort. I'll skip the next one because I have another slide on the Green Building Density Incentive Program coming up next. And last but not least, we are recognizing the economics piece to the challenges that we have ahead of us. Often the energy efficiency projects in commercial buildings don't necessarily pencil out. And so because of that, we are the first jurisdiction in the Commonwealth to develop what's called a property assessed clean energy financing program that allows for long-term financing for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and water efficiency projects in those buildings, both existing buildings and new commercial buildings. And with that, it helps to make it so those buildings are not only operating efficiently, but also adds value to those buildings. And we look forward to announcing, hopefully in the coming weeks, if not in the next couple of months, our first PACE project to go to closing. And all that money that is used for that is not public or county money, but rather private sector money. And so we simply set up the program to pave the way for that long-term financing to occur. On the lower right-hand side of the screen is a document that's out there. It's a couple years dated, but it still does a really good job at highlighting some of the green building development as a snapshot in time a couple of years ago. There are a few copies for you up on the dais. Unfortunately, I didn't have a copy for every person in the commission. But the good thing is, you see at the bottom there, that is available up online. So all you have to go to is to arlingtonenergy.us. And there are about 4 or 5 photos that you can go ahead and access. One of them is the cover to this report. I highlight it because it offers a lot of really good data and background as to what the density incentive program is. Over the last 12 years, nearly every site plan that's come through has been eligible, and it has participated in that program, taking advantage of it and adding density in exchange for a more energy efficient and green building. And as of now, a total of 45 large buildings have become more energy and water efficient than they would have if just built to code. And so that's the idea behind that program, is to do, in exchange, we get more long-term efficiency out of those buildings. And in exchange for that, we have higher density. And so I know that Joan Kelsch and Jessica Aberlin on our team are very happy to come in and brief you on this and elaborate on this. They're the experts on it, and they said they welcome the opportunity to go ahead and do that before this commission. In addition, we do work together with a variety of folks within CPHD, and we recognize the sector plans. Those long-term plans help to show the development to happen in places like Crystal City, Courthouse, and Roslyn. And working together with our colleagues in CPHD, we've been able to integrate sustainability and community energy plan ideals into those plans. And so we've been very fortunate to work together with those folks, and we look forward to opportunities to continue to do that. As promised, we do have data from our latest greenhouse gas emissions inventory that our consultants and staff work together to go ahead and put together. Let me do my best to highlight what this graph is trying to show you. The dotted line is the target that we're envisioning, dating back to 2007 as our baseline year. At just about 13 metric tons is where we were at for our greenhouse gas emissions, or CO2 equivalent, per person. There was a steady drop in our modeling, all the way down to 3.0 by 2050 with that dotted line. You can see that let's focus on the green line that is showing that we've revised the baseline due to a variety of factors that get into technical energy modeling. But just to say that we have dropped our baseline down to just a little bit less than 13 metric tons per capita per person. And then over time, because of those initiatives that I've listed, as well as other initiatives, we've been able to drive it down to just around 9 metric tons per capita per year as of 2016. So that's in comparison to, if you follow the dotted line above there, it had it just under 11 as the target. So that's good news. We will say that if you've heard the term low-hanging fruit before, I'd say that that's the benefit of taking care of the low-hanging fruit, some of the easier projects that have helped us to get to this stage. I'd love to think that we can continue the trends and to see that line continue down, all the way down to 0 for that matter, let alone 3. But I would say that it'll become tougher and tougher as we head out into the out years in order to reach our goals. And so we are looking, continuing to look for different initiatives and different ways to increase our energy efficiency as well as to decrease our energy waste throughout the community. And that is part of the reason why we're doing our community energy plan update. This is another way of looking at it. Instead of doing it per person, these are the overall or gross tonnage of greenhouse gas emissions. And the bottom line headline to this, once again, is we're doing better than we had forecasted or hoped to do. And that is due to a variety of factors, including a cleaner grid, electrical grid, where a lot of coal plants have been taken offline and replaced with more efficient natural gas power plants by Dominion Virginia Power. And so because of all that, we have been able to drop it down to close to 2 million tons per year. Those emissions are down 24% from 2007, and we're striving to go ahead and continue that trend. But once again, it is going to be a tougher road as we move forward. My apologies, I think our computers are not speaking the same language when it comes to the slides, so sorry for the arrows getting in the way there. But essentially, the headline to this is, even though our population, our number of jobs, and number of housing units have grown since 2007, our electric grid emissions rate, as well as the total energy used in buildings, as well as total energy used in transportation, have all gone down. So that's a great headline, and that's a great way to show that we are making progress indeed as a community. Now, you may be saying, well, all is well. Why do you need an update? Why do we have to change anything? The energy sector is very changeable. We call it a dynamic energy sector, where a lot of things have changed. The cost of LED light bulbs, the cost of solar photovoltaic systems, they have all dropped greatly in price. And that has changed a variety of things, including how people accept and adopt those technologies. In addition to that, I had mentioned coal plants going offline and natural gas plants coming online. That's due to fracking and a variety of other situations throughout the country that have enabled that natural gas to be much more accessible and usable. And so with those changes in the energy sector, we want to make sure the community energy plan is relevant and marks time with the market conditions and the technological advancements throughout the country and the world. We also have a lot of data from integrated energy master plans in Crystal City, as well as Courthouse, and we're incorporating that information into the CEP update as well. And last but not least, the data that I just showed you is our latest greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So we're going to incorporate that technical information and a renewed energy model into the community energy plan update. This is a quick snapshot to show you that this effort really started back in 2018 with our inventory work and as well as our modeling earlier this year. We are doing some market research to make sure that we have a good finger on the pulse of what's happening in the energy sector, not only now, but on into the future. We are drafting that community energy plan update and anticipate it going to the county board for a quick look before we bring it to the public in the December-January timeframe. And then we're going to have another round of vetting to this commission, a variety of other commissions, and also a community energy plan forum, which is a follow-up to a forum that we had today, and we are very pleased with Commissioner Gearin was able to make it there today, and we appreciate her participation. And essentially, we're going to have a follow-on forum. At that one, we're going to ask people, we heard that this is what you wanted in a CEP update. Did we get it right? We'll go through, incorporate edits to that CEP update during the spring and into the summer, and then bring it to the board for finalization and for their consideration in the June timeframe. So that's it for my formal presentation, but I'm happy to answer any and all questions you might have. There's my email address and the arlingtonenergy.us website. And from that website, you can access the Community Energy Plan online. And from that page, you can also offer any comments that you might have or encourage others to do so. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for that wonderful report. It's very encouraging, even with the caveats about the out years. The drop in energy in solar in particular has been really very encouraging, I think, and it's been a major contributor to changing the market incentives. So, Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers? We don't. So now I I don't know if there are any commissions. I don't think so. If not, the matter is with the commission. Well, why don't we start with clarifying questions? And I guess if you want to make some statements, we can roll that all in together and save a little bit of time. Does anybody have any questions? Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. I have a few questions. On page 8 of the report that we received, I was curious, you talk about district energy and CHP, combined heat and power. My recollection was that we were creating an energy district somewhere in Arlington. Has that actually happened, or is that still under investigation?
The district energy work that we did, I referred to earlier as what we call integrated energy master plans. The energy districts, there was no plan to create an energy district per se, but more along the lines of target certain areas where it made the most sense to develop a district energy system. Crystal City was a prime candidate, as was Courthouse, due to the public sector campus that we have just behind us outside our doors. In those integrated energy master plans, the economics, when fully developed and assessed versus current market conditions, did not make a plan forward to go ahead and implement the creation of those district energy systems in either Crystal City or at Courthouse. And so because of that, we said the analysis is done and we'll wait until market conditions change, such as redevelopment of the Courthouse area, before we revisit those energy models and figure out if it makes sense at that point in time, given then the energy prices, to go ahead and implement a district energy system.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would assume that both, in single-family homes, multifamily, and then also commercial, all contribute to our use of energy. Mm-hmm. And so, as a homeowner, if anybody's listening, if people want to understand how to make their homes more efficient, is there somewhere they could go on a website or somebody they could speak with? What would you suggest?
Well, I'm living that dream as we speak at my house. And so there are technical experts out there. I'd say the term building science experts would be the type of people that you would want to reach out to, because you want a holistic approach generally to look at your whole house comprehensively and make sure that you address energy efficiency first. And that includes the things that aren't very exciting but are very necessary to create a good building shell. Weatherizing around windows, doors, essentially fill in all the nooks and crannies that are currently allowing your conditioned air to escape to the outside. Once you address the energy efficiency, then you can start thinking about things like renewable energy, if you're a candidate for renewable energy. My house is not a candidate. I have 2 wonderful oak trees that shade my house, and I'm not taking them down. I have no intention to, but I'm going to continue to address energy efficiency to make my house more comfortable. And any other homeowners that want to go ahead and do that can look at the Green Home Choice program on our website, and there are a number of contractors that have worked in that Green Home Choice program, and they can look at that list and reach out to one or more of those contractors given the work that they've done.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody else? Question, Commissioner Gearin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dooley, and thank you for including me in the forum this morning. This was very interesting. For the benefit of my fellow commissioners, I just want to give you a little bit of understanding how it was structured. It was very interactive with a number of, I'd say, sort of medium to high-level stakeholders. So our discussion sort of jumped right in at the point about what sort of things would we like to see going forward, how can we address some of these issues that have been raised. I think you would have all enjoyed it, to the extent that more of us can go to the next one. I think that would be really interesting, and it could be helpful. My question is regarding the PACE financing that you referenced. Mm-hmm. Is that limited to commercial buildings?
Yes, it is. It is limited to commercial buildings. It is accessible to residential buildings, not condos. By state enabling legislation, those are forbidden. But buildings with, I want to say, 4 or more units, residential buildings, are also in play.
Within the county, we're actively working at, okay, excellent, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And if you know of any candidates, send them my way.
Thank you, Commissioner Gearin. Commissioner Lantelmi, and then Commissioner Schroll.
Yeah, I have a question about the renewable energy portion of the report. Now, this is a report that was done in 2013, which it's 5 years, so it's time to look at it again.
Correct.
But you're not looking to actually re-edit this and republish it. We'll keep the same plan and just talk about it? Is that the idea?
No, we are revisiting the numbers and the goals that are in there. Once again, think of the community energy plan as two different documents. One is part of the comp plan, and another one is an administrative document. The community energy plan has goals and policies, sort of the high level. What are we going to do to get ourselves out to our milestones out to the year 2050? And then we have strategies and tools in a companion document called the Community Energy Plan Implementation Framework. That's a more administrative document that often talks about those various initiatives and programs that were in the presentation. And so to get back to your question about renewable energy, it notes 160 megawatts of on-site renewable energy by the year 2050. Our consultants are currently working together with us, recognizing the technological advancements in renewable energy technology. Have we done ourselves a disservice by limiting it at 160 for on-site, number one? And number two, there's things called what are called virtual power purchase agreements, which allow us to go ahead and invest in renewable energy in plants elsewhere outside of the Arlington borders, and that's another way that we could potentially address this and reduce our emissions. And so that's yet another thing that we're endeavoring to do, and we will possibly include that in the CEP update come December or January.
That's good. Now, I do have a question, though, about with the 160 megawatts. You're talking about it needs under 5 years ago photovoltaics, it would need 14 million square feet of space. Do we have 14 million square feet of space, and excluding residential, single family and townhouses?
That question was asked back in 2011, and we had consultants come out and do an analysis of the available roof space and available place given the current technology at that point in time. Would we be able to meet that 160 megawatt level? And the short answer is yes.
Great.
You're welcome.
The other thing which we don't get into here, but I think we have to be careful about, is that there's a tension between our, especially when we get into the residential, the single-family houses, townhouses, that sort of thing. New ones, of course, are being built energy efficient, even without the specific lead incentives. New houses just tend to be more weather-tight. We do have a lot of older homes which were built years ago and, like mine, are leak like a sieve. But we want to keep those houses because they keep the character of the neighborhoods in place. So we have to find a way to bring, that would incentivize bringing those houses up at the same time allowing them to exist because we want to keep the character of the communities. With our single-family houses too, I've seen a number of them which are now putting photovoltaics on their roofs, which is great. But we have the tension there, as you mentioned, you have these big trees around you. We want to keep these trees. In the residential areas, it's a big issue now about keeping our tree cover. Trees and photovoltaics don't particularly go together, so we have to be careful we don't incentivize people to take down trees, because they have environmental energy efficiency advantages too, and we have to be careful on that. We should probably at least give a nod somewhere to that sort of thing.
It's a very good point, and anyone who asks me or anyone on our team, the two simple messages that we try to get across to people is, number one, energy efficiency first, and number two, trees trump solar.
Thank you.
So that's the message that we say time and again when people come to us. But that being said, if they don't come to us and they read the report, we need to make those messages clear in the report as well. So I'll make note of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dooley, thank you for your presentation and your work on this. It's good to see that we're also getting PACE applicants. That's good to see.
Yes.
I'd be encouraged to see that. And also for my colleagues, other communities in the Commonwealth are looking to Arlington's PACE program as an example, including Charlottesville and other places around the state. So kudos to staff for their work on that.
Thank you.
I was wondering, of the 160 megawatts goal for 2050, where are we now? Kind of what's the snapshot for 2018? Give or take a...
We're of the order of 1 to 2 megawatts.
Okay.
Thereabouts. And so the good news is our solar co-op program, which is actually no county funds are put toward the solar co-op. We are in partnership with Solar United Neighbors, a nonprofit that operates co-ops around the state. We offer assistance to them, as does EcoAction, another nonprofit in Arlington, actually, doing great work. And through those solar co-ops, every single phase, every single time we've offered a solar co-op, and let me just back up. A solar co-op is simply an opportunity to take advantage of what's called bulk purchasing, where you get a healthy dose of people who raise their hand and say, yes, I'd like solar in my house. And once it reaches a critical mass, then it's able to drive down the price south of 20% of what you would normally pay if you were to get solar on your house without anybody else doing it. Yep. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So those solar co-ops have yielded 40 to 50 new solar photovoltaic systems on homes each and every time we've done it, and we've done it 3 times. So we've done more than 100 of those systems, and more than doubled the number of solar on homes since we first started this.
Yeah, so solarized campaigns are great. That's fantastic, and customer acquisition costs are one of the big cost drivers. So that's fantastic. I guess my last question, Mr. Dooley, you mentioned the limiting factors for the PACE and the enabling legislation. It doesn't allow it for residential single-family homes. Do you know of any movement at the state level to change that? My colleague was asking about EE, and obviously PACE can be used for that, and it is in other states. I was wondering if you know of any movement to open it up for residential. And I know that there are some limitations with HUD and other things with financing that, so I know that that can be sort of a hurdle, but I just didn't know if you had any knowledge of that.
Yeah, I would say Fannie Mae is one of the biggest hurdles to overcome when it comes to residential PACE, and I'd love to be able to tell you a good story, but unfortunately, there is no movement at the state level. The only movement is against residential PACE. Our game plan is to show that commercial PACE is viable, show proof of concept that it can work, that it's not so scary, and be able to show those success stories to groups down in Richmond in about a year or two and revisit the conversation, because I agree with you that for those organizations or for those jurisdictions that have been able to put together a residential PACE program, it has yielded a number of beneficial projects. And so we hope to be able to get there. But at this point in time, I'm not holding my breath.
I guess my last question, I lied, Mr. Dooley, is the commercial PACE open to nonprofit organizations like churches that own their own property?
Yes, it is. Sometimes a misconception is that commercial PACE is only open to property owners that get taxes. They're assessed taxes for property taxes, but that is not the case. Churches, there's a church in D.C. that took advantage of their PACE program in D.C., and nonprofits as well, they can take advantage of it and might actually be some of the best candidates given their financial constraints that they have to access that private sector money that is long-term money to allow for those projects to go forward.
Yeah, I know a number of churches in the area are or were talking about such things, so I would encourage you and your colleagues to kind of reach out to that cohort. I'm sure they would be a welcome source of potential applicants, and so thank you again, Mr. Dooley. I appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. I skipped 2 questions here. I wanted to, on the 2013 report on page 14, I wanted to look at goal 4, which is the transportation goal. Mm-hmm. I appreciated greatly when I read this that you acknowledged, or the group acknowledged, that Arlington needed to be mindful of the unique needs of each portion of the population, including our low-income residents. And specifically because low-income Arlingtonians may not be able to avail themselves of things like Capital Bike Share because they take credit cards. Has that changed? Have there been some changes to the Capital Bike Share program that would allow low-income residents to avail themselves of it?
I'm not aware of changes. I know that there's been some discussions, and I don't know if it's been with county staff or others, other affiliates with the county that have tried to address the cost issues when it comes to the use of Capital Bike Share. For instance, reduced rates towards licensing or memberships. If anyone else from staff knows more than I do in that regard. Happy to yield the time to them. That being said, I think our overall approach when it comes to how we address energy issues, whether it's in transportation or in housing and so forth, is to make for affordable living. We hear the term affordable housing time and again, but affordable living really kind of highlights that it's utility bill, not necessarily the mortgage or the rent that they're paying. It's the utility bills that we're trying to really get at and lower those utility bills so that they're a smaller percentage of the overall cost on a monthly basis to those renters or to the people who are owning those homes.
Thank you. And speaking of lowering utility bills, I have 3 kids, and I'm constantly telling them, shut off the lights and don't waste water. And it strikes me that, Arlington Public Schools could have some sort of role in this as well in terms of education. I know Arlington Public Schools does, when they build, they create LEED, at least silver buildings, probably. But I'm wondering what level of education is taking place in the classrooms. Is that something that your group works with APS on?
We do. We attend. There's a sustainability committee that answers to the superintendent of the schools, and Joan Kelsch sits in on those meetings and relates all the various programs and initiatives that we have going on that they may be interested in and to be able to take advantage of. We also work on a regular basis with the science advisor for the schools. I will highlight Discovery Elementary School is a net zero, not only a net zero school by design, but also it has achieved after its year of performance that net zero status, meaning that it produced more energy than it actually used over the course of a year. So that is a shining star and an example of what can be done. And I think the schools are doing a really good job at addressing energy issues. And Kathy Lynn, their energy manager, deserves a lot of credit for that. When it comes to the curriculum, I will give you a heads up that our energy committee, which we are working together with very closely, part of E2C2, is endeavoring to talk with not only university professors about programs where there may be advantages for students in those programs to do projects related to the community energy plan and implementation of the plan, but also Arlington Tech at the Career Center. Seems like a viable and a great opportunity to tap into high schoolers in Arlington Tech because there's an engineering track, and underneath the engineering track, there are 3 different programs that are right in line with the community energy plan regarding renewable and innovative technologies, the power sector, and electricity. And so all of that is music to my ears, and in fact, we have a meeting tomorrow discussing with Arlington Tech representatives about the possibility of doing some sort of partnership.
Great. I think also that the fact that students now, high school students now, in order to graduate from APS and actually any school in Virginia, are going to be required to do a senior project. And it seems that this sort of thing really lends itself very well to students looking to reduce energy in their own lives.
Fantastic.
In their own
Thank
homes.
you.
Commissioner Morton.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Dooley, for the presentation. I have a quick comment and then a question. Regarding the residential programs, I know there's some difficulties you've mentioned. I wanted to point out there's a really fantastic program called the Chicago Bungalow Initiative, which is investing in the same kind of neighborhood Commissioner Lantelmi is talking about, often lower income neighborhoods. And it's not, I think there is some public subsidy, but it's also a really cool sort of public-private partnership. And a lot of the role of the government is really educating people about different techniques you can use because, you don't want people priced out of their homes. And as you might know, Chicago is full of these bungalow neighborhoods that might have some appropriate parallels here.
That's great. Thank you very much. I will look that up and share it with the rest of our team. We'll take a look at it. Thank you.
Okay. And then I just had a quick question about how do you see autonomous vehicles and these new kind of mobility systems fitting into the energy plan? You mentioned in 2013, the car sharing and bike sharing, but with the advent of the evolution of these new transportation options, how do you see that fitting into the energy plan?
Well, that's an example of where we really lean on our Transportation Bureau and the expertise that they have to make sure that the various technologies that are available, whether it's autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, the scooters that are out there and so forth, that we're in sync with the experts in the transportation sector so that the community energy plan is advocating for and advancing those things that are going to help us reduce our energy use, but at the same time allow people to do the multimodal transportation that we strive for here in Arlington. So I don't have an opinion on autonomous vehicles, but if I have questions about them, I know where to turn with our Transportation Bureau. Yvette.
I have I have a couple of questions. Just want to say that I was able to put solar on my roof to 100%. We got an electric bill with in the summer, a $12 credit to us. So we were able to make more energy than we needed during that month, and we had a credit, which we then used up. And we've had a zero bill, we've had a $6 bill. It's really very exciting to open that bill. I would say, though, that following on Commissioner Lantelmi's comment of certain homes that can't do full solar or even partial solar because of the trees, I feel that where you can do that, it's a community benefit. It's not only a personal benefit. So I'm really happy that we were able to take advantage of the federal subsidy, which cut our costs in half, I think, by a third or something like that. I don't know if that program is still operational. However, in the back of my home, there are two parcels. One is privately owned by a association, homeowner association. The other is called the Park at 19th Road South, a very poetic name for a park. These two parcels, about 2 acres, abut each other. They're small parcels, but there are some absolutely gorgeous trees back there, tall, straight, healthy. My question there is, and I've mentioned this to you before, is it possible, I don't see that in your report, to look at carbon sequestration as an element in the community energy plan?
So earlier analyses for a locality the size of Arlington and as urban as Arlington is, through soils and forestry, we've seen that that type of sequestration you're speaking of is not necessarily meaningful or significant relative to our carbon footprint. So there's still, a lot of emissions that are happening, and so from a relative standpoint, given our 26 square miles, it makes it difficult. We are mindful, though, that robust tree canopy plays an important role in reducing the heat island effect, as well as providing direct shading that we had talked about against the summertime heat. So we want to be able to document the health and the status of our urban heat island as something the county is tracking as part of the broader sustainability picture. And we work together with our colleagues in Parks and Recreation, with Vincent and others when it comes to addressing tree canopy issues. So we notice the benefit of it, and not necessarily wholly because of carbon sequestration, but the other ancillary benefits that are real.
And it would really, I think, be good if we could somehow, even if it's not a measure of carbon sequestration, but measure the benefit of trees. I know we have anecdotal studies about that benefit, but it would be very, very good to help us find ways to show the value, almost in terms of something more concrete than it's cooler. I mean, the reduction in your energy bill if you have a tree over your house rather than if you don't, and things like that. So that would be a good thing to have. My other question is, I wonder, could you give an example, because I'm searching my own mind and I can't come up with one, with how you had integrated the community energy plan in one of those 3 sector plans that you mentioned, aside from district energy, the district energy component of that, or does it amount to only district energy?
It is not just solely district energy. We do reference district energy in those areas where it makes the most sense, in the densely populated areas where there's a very high what's called energy use intensity, EUI. I would say the best way that we incorporate the ideals of the community energy plan into those areas is there are often sustainability chapters within each of those sector plans. And so we work on the languaging and the messaging in those to make sure that they mirror what we're advocating for in the community energy plan with better, higher efficiency technologies and equipment to be used in buildings, but also to ensure that the tree canopy is preserved to address the urban heat island effect. Those are a couple of examples. We also have a variety of other ways that we work together with other staff on community, I should say, comprehensive plan elements, whether it's with the Transportation Bureau on Master Transportation Plan, the Affordable Housing staff and CPHD on their plan as well, and incorporating sustainability elements, which are actually called out in the Affordable Housing Master Plan. DPR on biophilia issues, economic development. We won the first Lead for Communities Award in the nation, so we're very proud of that. And that's, Joan Kelsch had spearheaded that effort. And we also have a sustainability dashboard, which is forthcoming, and Joan Kelsch is working on that with a variety of other departments, and so more about that later on.
Super. So when we go through an SPRC review, we look to the proposed development project to be consistent with the elements of the comp plan. Mm-hmm. And this is the way we can work at this site plan by site plan as well, which was sort of the intent of my question. But thank you very much for that information. If there are no other questions or comments, then thank you very much for your report, Mr. Dooley.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Okay, Madam Clerk, would you call the next item, please?
Item number 2 is U-3175-07-1 with the Arlington Public Schools. This is the new elementary school at the Reed School. We have Nicole Bowling, our planning staff, to present this item this evening.
So, Miss Bowling, you're on deck, is that right? That's
Yep.
all right, I'll give
Yep.
you,
Hang on one second.
Take your time.
Just get set up here. Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Nicole Bowling, and I am with the CPHD Planning Division. I am joined this evening by Rob Gibson with DES Transportation, Diane Probus with the Department of Parks and Recreation, and Leon Vines, who is also with the CPHD Planning Division.
Welcome to everybody.
We are here to present the proposed use permit amendment for the new elementary school at the Reed site. Let me see. Okay, to start off, the subject property is located at 1644 North McKinley Road, which is located within the Highland Park Overlea Knolls Civic Association and adjacent to the Westover Village and Terraleeway Heights Civic Association. This slide here just provides a background of the uses on the site throughout the years. The site has been used for various educational programs and civic uses, and the site is currently used for the Stratford program, which will be relocated to the Wilson School site prior to the start of construction for this project, and also the Westover Library still continues to operate here. And to just discuss the land use, the current land use designation on the general land use plan is public, and the crosshatch shown on the GLUP indicates public ownership of the subject property. And the existing zoning of the site is S3A. The existing site area is approximately 10.8 acres and is comprised of approximately 61,000 square feet of gross floor area, GFA. This includes a little over 16,000 square feet of GFA for the Westover Library. There are also 72 existing parking spaces on the site. During construction, the Westover Library will continue operation, and the Westover Farmers Market, which also operates on the site, will continue operations. However, a modified vendor layout will be required due to the location of the construction fencing during that time. So a little bit of project information. This site was identified in the school board's CIP as a location for a new elementary school, which kickstarted the public review process back in October 2017 to look at the design and construction of a new elementary school at the Reed site. During this community review process, there were 14 joint meetings, including a site tour and 2 community meetings. So this is the overall schematic design that came out of the community review process. And the design includes, as you can see here on the screen, a 4-story school addition and renovation within a compact footprint of approximately 112,919 square feet. And this, including the existing library, the entire building will encompass approximately 130,551 square feet of GFA. So it is for a design capacity of 732 students, 133 on-site parking spaces, improved site access, entry plazas, playgrounds, and open space. And there's a request for proposed zoning ordinance modifications for a parking reduction, increased building height, and a reduced building setback at the front. So the following slides are going to go over a little bit of staff's analysis of the proposal. So to further illustrate the improvements to the open space and recreational areas, this image shows where the basketball courts, playground areas, and improved field space will be located. And in addition, the athletic fields will remain in their current layout and approximate size. And trees that are removed will be replaced to accommodate the expansion, and the species will be finalized during the final landscape review. And this slide, so I'm gonna turn over this portion of the presentation to Rob to talk a little bit about the parking and site circulation aspects of the proposal.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. Just a disclaimer, I was in the 1984, enrolled at Reed in 1984 when it originally closed, so it is extremely exciting to bring it back as a neighborhood elementary school today. So the project has a total of 133 parking spaces on site. And the parking and site circulation are always critical parts of the public review. We want to get those elements right. The project has distributed the parking throughout the site to support the different uses and needs, along with supporting community uses in the neighborhood. So in the northwest corner of the site, there is an expansion of the existing lot to 78 spaces by bumping out towards Washington Boulevard, generally along the axis of the library. Then there is an expansion of the lot on 18th Street, and that lot will include a total of 55 spaces, along with the pickup and drop-off lanes, 47 spaces dedicated all day, along with 8 spaces in the pickup and drop-off lane that are going to be used part of the day. And so in addition to the on-site parking, we looked at the street utilization of parking, and if you go to the next slide, I think we'll talk about the requested modification. The zoning ordinance, specifically section 1437C1, allows the county board to modify parking for schools. It does not allow modification for libraries. So the required parking for the 732 seats of design capacity would come to a total of 150 spaces for the school and the library, 117 for the school, and 33 for the library. In looking at the applicant's request, specifically for 100 spaces associated with the school and maintaining the 33 spaces associated with the library, staff supports the request because of the, and I'll go to the next slide. There we go. Because of the approach that the community and staff took in order to review and right-size the parking for the site while minimizing loss of open space, trees, and other site disturbances. So first we looked at the zoning ordinance requirements, then the transportation consultants and APS looked at the actual projected demands for parking for both the school and the library. If you've ever been to the library, you know that the demand is probably a little higher than the actual zoning ordinance requirement for parking. So that was considered in how to look at the site. That wasn't just sort of, oh, well, the library says 33 spaces. We're going to look at it just as 33 spaces when 45 people show up for story time. And so we looked at the whole site comprehensively. We looked at the application of transportation demand management strategies to reduce the parking demand on the site. And then we also looked at the use and availability of on-street parking, which is directly adjacent to the site. The applicant also looked at parking within the neighborhood, but for this exercise, we really focused on the utilization of on-street parking directly along the site frontages. And so if you go to the next slide, I think. Oh. So all in all, we recommend approval of the site plan, of the use permit with 133 spaces to support the two uses. One of the challenges, this is a second issue associated with the parking sort of, is that in adding spaces to the northwest lot, we lost a connection from that area to Washington Boulevard. And there's been some work by APS to look at this. This connection hasn't yet been added back into the design at the Transportation Commission last week. Staff recommended and the commission supported the plans be updated to provide an ADA connection from this rear portion of the site and these parking spaces back into the plans. And that continues to be staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission to have the plans updated with a similar walkway. And I'll hand it back to Nicole.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Again, this slide shows the designated land use category for the site, and just as part of the 2232 determination and through our analysis, staff has found that the expanded school facility is a feature shown on the GLUP, and the location, character, and extent are substantially in conformance with the county's comprehensive plan. And then on the next slide, I just go over briefly our community outreach process. In addition to the PFRC BLPC joint review process over the last year, we did the following outreach during the use permit review, and staff has communicated information about the project to the surrounding civic associations, adjacent neighbors, and Westover retailers throughout this review process. And the main concerns included during this review include tree removal at the rear of the site, loading, increased traffic in the neighborhood, and retail parking. And then to go over just one more time, the Arlington County zoning ordinance requested modifications for building height and setbacks and the parking. Staff is supportive of the requested zoning ordinance modifications because the massing, scale, and height of the proposed building preserves open space in the neighborhood by building up and not out, and generally maintains the existing footprint of an impervious surface on the site. There's only an increase of approximately 22,000 square feet of impervious area with the addition. And a modification of the front required setback is needed due to the utility constraints on the site and will be mitigated by additional landscaping at the front of the site. And Rob just discussed the parking modification and the reasons why we support that. So to conclude, the staff recommends that the Planning Commission find per Virginia Code Section 15.2-2232, that the proposed character, location, and extent of the elementary school at the Reed School site is a feature shown on and is substantially in accord with the goals and policies of Arlington County's comprehensive plan. And B, approve the subject use permit amendment for the renovation and addition project to create a new elementary school at the Reed site with a design capacity of approximately 732 students with modifications to parking, height, and setbacks, subject to the proposed conditions of the staff report and with no further scheduled county board review. And we're all happy to answer any questions you have, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I think we'll turn to APS applicant for their report.
Okay, good evening. I'm Jeff Chambers. I'm Director of Design and Construction with Arlington Public Schools, and with me tonight is Wick Knox, who's the architect for the project with VMDO, and he will be doing the second half of the presentation.
Could I ask you to speak, but come a little closer to the mic? Yeah,
Okay.
a little better. And you can raise the podium.
Okay.
Raise it as high as it will go.
Is that better?
There it goes. Perfect. Thank you.
Make sure I can hear you. And also, we have Rob Schiesel with Grove Slade, who will be here to answer any transportation questions you may have, who did the transportation study for the project. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about process and schedule, what we did with the project. And first, starting with the project parameters, essentially we're creating a new neighborhood elementary school, back to what Rob went to, a bit larger than that was. And we also support the APS strategic goals, which include which are for healthy, safe, and supported students, and address the capacity by providing at least 725 seats. We're currently at 732, correct? All right, so it's at least what our direction is. And then we are intending to open school by 2021. And if anybody has followed the process, we started with a budget of $49 million because we had intended to reuse a portion of the Reed building and some other factors that entered into it. But through the process, the board has agreed to provide up to $55 million, but with a strong direction to spend less. And we need to find opportunities to reduce that cost. But it got us able to continue with the process because the funding is available. The overall project timeline, you can see where we are currently in the use permit approval in November of 2018. So we're sort of in the middle of the works that we're doing. But we started with a joint county and school board kickoff in October of 2017. And then we worked through the concept design approval, schematic design approval, and we've just recently submitted the design development submission for the process. And you can see 2021 schools open, so there's a huge construction phase that'll be coming up. The process that we worked with the joint BLPC and PFRC, if many are familiar with the process that we followed over the years, we used to have 2 separate meetings. We started this process thinking we were going to have 3 joint meetings and then we'd go to separate meetings. But the process seemed to work really well. So we maintained the joint meetings. Everybody got the information at the same time. We worked through the processes at the same time, so everybody seemed to be happy with that. There were breakout times where the 2 different groups would meet separately and have conversation, so it worked out very well. We also had a public site tour in December, cold morning in December, and then we had the community forum and another community forum in May 16th. So we've had some public outreach at the same time. Site design, talk a little bit about the site. The existing building and coverage with play courts and other paving is 39% site coverage. One of the biggest things we work through with the committees is to cover as little bit of site as possible. One thing that we did find in the process is there's a storm, a large storm drain that bisects the site. And that process, we found that we couldn't, or through the process, we found we couldn't really bridge over it, even though we tried a few times. But it essentially cuts the site. So we really came down to the process where we either had to build on one side of the pipe or the other side of the pipe. Was the most efficient way, a cost-effective way to work with it. So, next slide. So, with the current site development where we currently are, we've kept the fields. We still have two rectangular play fields. We have the ball field. The site on the corner of 18th Street and North Lexington, where the old library site is still going to remain as it is. We're not touching that. And we are only covering 45% of the site with impervious surfaces. So I think that's pretty good considering what we're adding to the site. And that is helped by going up. As we talked about, the current site has 46 spaces in the Madison 18th Street lot. You can see the Westover Library is remaining on the Washington Boulevard McKinley Road corner. And the Children's School and Integration Station, which was a one-story section attached to a two-story section attached to the library. And then we had the small lot on 18th and McKinley with 26 spaces. With a total of 76, has already been pointed out by the county presentation. Next. So anyway, for the combined transportation and parking strategy, what we're really looking at doing on the site is you can see the colored renderings of the vehicles. For school use in red, library use in green, parent pickup and drop-off is in blue, and school bus drop-off and pickup is, of course, yellow in the yellow buses. The bus drop-off is to be on 18th Street. Currently, with the children's school, the bus drop-off is much closer to Washington Boulevard. We felt with the strategy it was better to pull the buses back with regard to the intersection of Washington Boulevard and McKinley Road. The other thing that you will note is currently, if you've ever used that parking lot, there's an entrance and an exit. There's two separate curb cuts. With the strategy we're looking at doing is there's only one curb cut and it's behind the buses. And we can also utilize the space where the blue cars can be used for visitor parking when it's not a parent pickup and drop-off time as well. So trying to get as much off the street as we can. And then you'll see on the North Lexington, I don't think all the teachers' cars will be lined up in a row like that, but staff parking, there is adequate parking throughout the community as per the study that's available during school time for staff parking, so we didn't need all of the spaces on the site. There we go. Building entrances, one of the things that we try to do is currently we have the plaza in front of the library. We're going to not change that. That's going to remain as it is, and you have the library public entrance where it currently is, and where both of the entrances currently will remain even after the project. We will be working the purple arrow shows the staff entrance from the staff parking lot in the back, which will be ADA accessible, is designed to be ADA accessible. It could also be used as a public entrance should that need ever arise. But the intent is to get library staff into the building on an accessible route. In the back of the building off of 18th and North Madison, we are looking as a school staff entrance only, as well as custodial and food service entrance would be in the back. We're not looking at that to be a public entrance in any way. The school main entrances would be A and B, and it's very convenient drop-off from students and parents coming from the community to the north, as well as from the student drop-off and from the buses could enter either A or B, whichever was most convenient for them to go into the building. And then C is the after-hours gym entrance. There are also toilets that would be accessible from the outside. The gym could be locked off, typically as we've been doing on typical projects. That entrance also is for the bike parking and the lockers for staff to utilize who would ride a bike to school. Next. And then we looked at the site very carefully with regard to accessibility and with regard to accessibility. One of the things we noted first early on was the fact that Washington Boulevard, the sidewalk, is not handicapped accessible. It's an excessive slope, and we didn't want to encourage people to utilize that. We do have access, as mentioned by the county, through the parking lot for people that would park there and be able to access the sidewalk and go down, but we did not have a dedicated sidewalk. Our hope was to encourage people to use accessible routes, as APS really tries universal design and tries to make sure that all routes that are mainly used are accessible to all. So we didn't want to make that access, even if we made an accessible route at the parking lot. Our concern has always been that you're taking people from an accessible route to an inaccessible route, and we were concerned with that. We are looking at options, how we can make that work. At this point in time, we don't have a full resolution. Our initial looks at it was significant additional costs, so we're trying to find ways that we can do it at a no-cost change because the budget is paramount, and as the board has directed us, we're trying to be less than the $55 million. Next. And you can see what we're doing with the walkways. The main north-south connector that goes through the site currently is 4'10". That was very important to the community to keep that connection. We are actually making it more important by making it 6 foot wide with the playground on the one side and then the fields on the other side. So it'll be a very open and proud connection between the two or across the site. As far as bicycle facilities, we have bicycle racks throughout the site. We have bike racks in the back for they can be utilized by library staff and or library patrons. There's bicycle racks on the front of the site, on the side of the site. Some of the bike racks at the entrance off the playground at the paved areas. Some of them are actually undercover. The blue oval is the after-hours entrance as well as the Class 1 bike storage with space for 16 bikes for staff for the TDM. We also have the toilets, and the toilets actually have a connection then to a shower space that can be utilized by staff. And then when the toilets are just used in the weekends and evenings and for other events, it would just be the toilets would be available. I don't think we'd be providing showers at that time. Next. This is with regard to the trees. We met with Urban Forestry and worked with Vincent on what we were looking at with regard to the trees. There are a few that we wish we wouldn't have had to take out, but working on one side of the pipe, we really have to get the utilities in. We're also looking again as the universal accessibility for pathways. We really have to touch the site, and if more than 30% of a root zone is touched, we really should be removing the tree and replacing it because chances of survival are minimal. Thanks. So this is the plan that we're looking at doing. We're required to put in 49 trees. We're looking at adding 86. And we will, again, we have worked with and will continue to work with Urban Forestry and Vincent on the types of trees and what we're putting in. And as you can see, the paved play areas, which are the brightly colored basketball courts, that also doubles as the fire department access as they need to get to the 4-story building and be able to drive, have a 25-foot drive. But instead of creating a separate drive, we're utilizing what will be used every day as a play space so that we're not building two things. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Wick, who will take us through the school design.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Wick, how about you control it? Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm as tall as Jeff. Does this work?
That does work. Thank you.
I've worked with a number of you at PFRCs and public meetings. You know, one of the things that we struggle with when we do these renderings is to the extent to which we show the trees or don't show the trees, because you need to see the building. If we show all the trees in their full extent, you can't quite see the architecture. So we have more than just that one little tree there in the middle. You see there's a few others that are half-toned there. But this is a view from the ground level other side of the street, where McKinley turns and becomes 18th Street North, looking at that entry plaza and the degree to which we worked very carefully to have a very slight slope to get up and be able to see the front door, but also get to the front door without having to use stairs. Part of the real challenge of the existing building is that it is right up against the curb. So the front door is 7 feet from the curb and only about 15 to 20 feet from the curb, so you can't really see it. And that was one of the big problems that we were trying to address here. Standing for that same spot and then going up about 30 feet in the air, you can see a little bit better how we're using some retaining walls and some stepped lawns to get up to that central gathering place on a very gradual walkway that goes around the side to get to the entryway, which is in the back left of that piece. That's kind of the space it takes to get there in the most gentle and accessible way in the spirit of universal design. So what you're looking at is the admin suite, and to the left of it is the front doors. Above that is the main public space of the building, which is the cafeteria, also the extended day space, and it has a large roof that covers an outdoor dining terrace, and the underside of that roof in that space will be a simulated wood fiber cement product. To the left of the courtyard is the existing building to remain. The brick piece with the clock tower on it is the current gym that is being repurposed as the library with a larger opening that we're adding, what you see in glass right there, north-facing light for the library. And then on the right side of the courtyard is our 4-story academic piece. This is building up, not out, as Arlington has talked about very loudly for a long time. As you walk down the sidewalk from 18th Street towards the school, this is the view from the sidewalk. That's the new expanded parking lot on the right, and a view of the 4-story massing and how we've made some attempts to break it down from a very large piece into 2 smaller pieces, some different materials. And you also begin to see the extent of the roof overhang, which supports a 0.5 megawatt solar array, and making the building a fully net zero ready building. On the ground on the north side, this is the view of that fire lane Jeff was talking about, along with the basketball courts. In the background, you can see a full-size court. In the foreground, there's a half court. We were a little restricted in what we could do in terms of getting the fire truck in and still getting the courts to work, and this was the solution. We also have, as we get up to the upper floors, in order to accommodate the number of classrooms and some of the breakout space in the corridors, the building's cantilever out. That allows us to use that space that's underneath it for bioretention zones around the building, getting the play courts, the playgrounds, the pathways, the fields, and the bioretention all to work here was quite a puzzle that took a lot of work to solve. Pulling back up, this is kind of 25, 30 feet in the air right over the Pee Wee softball field, looking back at the building, and those 2 pieces that stick out to provide the extended learning spaces for grades 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can see the after-hours entrance for the gymnasium on the bottom right side of that, where the full-size court is, and you begin to see the walkway that goes through the site, and then the playground on the right side of that image. There's also 2 different walkways that cross over those bioretention areas to connect to the fields. Back down on the ground level, this is the edge of the playground area. So on the right side of the screen, you're seeing the pathway. It's a fully accessible path that goes all the way around the site that allows us to get to areas like an outdoor classroom that would be fully accessible both on the top and the bottom, and also begin to work with the slope to do some fun things like some slides and other play areas, so that the entire playground doesn't have to be perfectly flat, but at the same time universally accessible to people at both the top and the bottom. Coming around to 18th Street North on the back side of the uphill side of the site, view of the loading dock area, on the right side of the slide, the staff entrance, and kind of the massing of the building a little bit. The building wedges into the hill a little bit, so we're taking a 4-story building and reducing its height a little bit. The gym is wedged in, so you're really just seeing 3 stories on the back there. And that might be my last slide. Nope, it's the floor plans. All right, so the entryway is, again, in the back left of the entry courtyard is the main entry, and the visitor's entry right off of McKinley. On the right side of the slide, in the middle of the building, is the pedestrian and car drop-off entry. We think buses are going to probably drop off and enter in the front. That's for me?
How many more slides do you have?
I don't know, but I'll go faster. How about that?
Okay.
So in blue is classrooms, yellow is the gym, red is the admin suite. Going up a floor in the center of the building, you have the cafeteria and the main public space of the building. On the left side of the slide in purple is arts and music. You see the double height space of the gym, and then the first grade. Below that was kindergarten. Then you have 2 floors of 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. You can see the small extended learning spaces that are created by bumping out those spaces. Here's a rendering of the dining commons main public area. The repurposed library with some graphics that have yet to be designed in terms of educational graphics that go on the walls, and a view of the gym with north-facing light to bring it natural light into the project. Construction, Jeff covered this. We aim to start next September as soon as Wilson and Stratford and Fleet are up, and finish in 2021. This is a phasing plan and a construction plan that shows how we would keep the farmers market and McKinley open and fully operational, the entrances that would maintain in place for the library, both in the front and the back, an ability to phase that parking lot in and bring it in early, the one that's right behind the library, and also the desire to try to use as much of the site as possible for staging, storage of materials, and parking, which is actually a very key piece of our cost reduction strategy for this, given the inflation and how busy the economy is. Just being able to come and park at a site will increase the number of bids we'll get quite dramatically, and so that's a key piece of it. I think we've seen this on the schedule, and that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think we've come to the time for public speakers. Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers?
We have 3 speakers this evening. I have Steve Cohen, as followed by Alexander Berlinski.
Mr. Cohen, welcome.
Okay, I'm shorter. Members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Steve Cohen. My wife Barbara and I are 40-year residents of Arlington County.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And have resided at our current home on 18th Street North for the past 27 years. My comments today center on the impact of the project on the 18th and Madison Streets neighborhood and the manner with which the application addresses those impacts. I appreciate that the concerns of our community have been mentioned in the application. My bottom line is really a question for the Commission members. Does it not make sense that those seeking the use permit identify agreed-upon measures it will take to mitigate adverse community impacts before it receives the permit? If the answer to that question is no, then should the applicant not, at a minimum, demonstrate that it is engaging in good faith in a dialogue with the community to address those impacts? The corner of Madison and 18th Street is the most densely populated residential corner of the Reed property, and the only part of the property where homes sit literally a few feet from the built environment. Yet we are being asked to accept a disproportionate share of the burdens of this project including having the commercial epicenter of the facility placed just a few feet from our homes in the form of a loading dock. The decision to place the loading dock at 18th and Madison was made without consulting our community. My neighbors and I attended every one of the joint committee meetings, and I can tell you that by the time this decision was discussed, we were told that this train had left the station. Nevertheless, my neighbors and I have put that behind us, and we have sought since June of this year to engage APS and county officials in a dialogue. Our community seeks to discuss mitigation measures that can be taken at the property and seeks binding commitments from people empowered to make such commitments. We have, in good faith, identified several measures we think could be taken, such as limiting the hours of commercial truck deliveries consistent with the county's noise ordinance, and have welcomed input on those and other possible remedies. The results of our outreach have been less than satisfying. Our request for a dialogue with officials empowered to make binding commitments, unfortunately, have been rebuffed. What we have been told, and the way I read the application, is that some vaguely defined measures may be taken at some undetermined point in the future. A few days ago, the APS construction manager replied to a letter we wrote back in August, suggesting that many of the decisions we seek are made at the state level and are thus beyond the ability of APS to address. Fine, let's bring the state people to the table too. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today, and let me just end where I started. According to the county website, one of the purposes of the use permit is to ensure that appropriate safeguards are in place and that applicants consult affected communities. Consistent with that, does it not make sense that the applicant reaches agreement with the community on appropriate mitigation measures? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Is Mr. Belinsky. Good evening. Thank you.
Dear Planning Commission members, I want to bring a very narrow question about how APS calculated design, capacity design. My first slide, please. Next slide, please. The question arises from community discussion of the work zone, and I use the planning unit data to calculate what would be a potential work zone capacity, and it exceeds substantially what the capacity is proposed. Next slide. Then I look in more detail how APS calculated school. The left part of the table, it's what was presented to a school board based on some average factor, 23 and 1/3 student for class. And on the right side, it's a number of students which are allowed by APS as a maximum recommended class size. It's about 20% less than the state maximum. And you can see that a maximum capacity is about 802, which is 10% more. And my concern is that if you put in stones, it's 732 approximately, and the county may wish increase capacity, it will be limited by what is put in use permit. So my question to county, to Planning Commission, next slide. So in general, is it feasible that APS would maximum capacity to use permit, and it give its flexibility to address demand? And more specifically for Reed School, I have discussion with staff, and they pointed out that several other provision in use permit is linked for proposed capacity, for example, parking. And some school facility like auditorium is also focused for the 732, not 10% over. Nevertheless, if my appeal is that accommodate walkable neighborhood, these people do not need parking. And also I mentioned that there is a plan to increase density. It will go probably in several months or earlier to Planning Commission to 4-6 stories, and it's not anticipated by the planning. So I encourage you to give recommendation to reconsider use permit for what is corresponded to maximum class size on IPS level as of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there further public speakers?
Larson?
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, I'm Barnes Lawson Jr. I represent the Westover Shopping Center, and that's why I'm here tonight. My parents, myself, my brother, my sister, my kids all went through the Arlington school system, and I think it's one of the finest that is anywhere in the country. In all those years, I can't think of any gripes that we had. In representing the shopping center, their concern is parking. And what's happening over there is somebody will come to the shopping center, park in the back or in the front, go into one of the shops, and then cross the street or go to the farmer's market or whatever it is they do. So that was truly a concern of ours, especially given that there's a request for a reduction in parking. I've had some experience at Westover Baptist Church and at the swim club, and we know that sometimes there is problems, such as back to school night or the kids are having a play or whatever. So that was a concern. In the beginning, we we felt like our concerns weren't really be taken seriously, but I think what happened is they had such a massive task in front of them that in all honesty, they did not focus on our concerns until later in the process. We recently had a meeting and we're very satisfied with what the folks at schools have told us. We have two solutions that I wanted to share with you. One is we have the angled parking on Washington Boulevard, and that is in county right of way, but it was utilized for, it was counted towards the required parking for the post office when that use permit was approved. And we wanted to be able to somehow leave that for us. And I think the manager has come to the conclusion that they'll put 2-hour limitation on the parking there, which we think will take care of the problem. We also have the ability to add some spaces towards the, in the back of the lot. We've got a request into zoning to figure out how the heck we do that. It's one of those old use permits that we can't do anymore because of changes in the law through the many years that we've had the zoning ordinance. Like I say, we had the meeting with the school system, and there are some things that we're just going to have to figure out in the future. There's no way around that. And the schools are going to have to adjust to whatever problems that they encounter. We're going to work closely with the principal. The one thing that I would like to suggest to you all, there are some conditions in the use permit that require certain notifications to go out to the civic associations and so forth. We think that the managing member of the ownership of the shopping center should also be a recipient of those. With that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Does that conclude our public speakers? Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'm going to turn to two of my fellow commissioners to deliver summary reports from letters we received, one from the Parks and Recreation Commission, the other from Urban Forestry. So, Commissioner Gearan, will you give us the PRC summary report?
Thank you for these excellent reports. The letter I have is from the Park and Rec Commission, and it's expected to go out tomorrow on the 6th. Generally, the members of the Park and Rec Commission have enjoyed the process, and they've participated in it since last fall. They've provided input on the design options considered, and they're supporting the current design. They're especially happy with the design providing some protection and enhancement of the open space, of the fields and recreational facilities at the site, and preserving as many trees as possible. And they also appreciate the building up, even knowing that that does contribute to costs and that resources have been committed to preserving the open space and doing this building up. They like the addition of the restrooms for the public to add to the community's enjoyment of the space, and the new gym, which would potentially be open to the community as well. One of the issues they raise, and I'm going to raise this in a similar way when we talk about questions, is they'd like to see adequate provision for spectator seating in the gym for this neighborhood, and also the possibility for setup structures for volleyball, pickleball, and other sports activities, inside, outside. So that's the summary from them.
Very good. Thank you very much. Commissioner McSweeney.
So I'm reading it off my phone and hope it doesn't interfere with the mic here. I'm going to read part of a letter from the Urban Forestry Commission. I received it from the chair, Nora Palmatier. And I believe all commissioners have received it, and they have, I believe, submitted it. In general, the Urban Forestry Commission, who did participate in several of the PFRC meetings, supports the Breed School use permit. They note that the tree loss from this school's construction is less than has been seen at most schools, with 159 trees preserved. They liked the accessible path around the school, even though it does mean the removal of several large canopy trees, which provided screening for the neighborhood. And they do urge that tree replacement use fewer small ornamental trees and increase planting of larger shade and evergreen trees as a screen, so I will raise that when we have our discussion. And they also recommend that green walls be considered as part of the silver LEED design. They were quick to say that Arlington Public School staff has been very responsive to the tree care recommendations, and contracts now specify the timing of tree planting and require a 3-year tree inventory post-construction. Tree survival rates do have financial and environmental impact on all county residents, so they encourage spending on school landscape maintenance as appropriate. And again, they do support this project.
Thank you very much. Was there a Transportation Commission? Yes, thank you, Commissioner Lantelmi.
The Transportation Commission took this up at its meeting on November 1st last week. There was discussion on parking, but overall the commission was content with the reduction in parking from what otherwise would be required, and for the accommodations for the merchants across the street. It was noted that there is, in the middle of the day, only about 40% utilization of the parking in the neighborhood outside of, other than bordering the school site. The commission voted, actually did add an amendment, though, to the main motion, which was to add an APA compliant pedestrian path, extend that pedestrian path up to Washington Boulevard, and that was voted on unanimously by the commission. The main motion to approve the redevelopment passed the commission by a vote of 8-1.
Great, thank you very much. So the matter is now with the commission. I'm going to turn to Commissioner Schroll for a report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff has done an able job of giving us an overview, so there's an outline of the background of this discussion, this project, which I won't go into because staff has kind of already gone over that pretty ably. As Ms. Bowling noted, we had, I think, 12 or 13 meetings of the PFRC, BLPC. Most of the discussion was around the concept phase. There was 6 concepts that we were considering. Both BLPC and PFRC rallied around one scheme. As Ms. Chambers noted, it came in over budget. Staff pulled that from consideration, and then after an agreement between schools and county, it kind of came back to life and moved beyond the concept phase into schematic, which was a pretty quick phase. Mr. Knox did a great job of incorporating kind of feedback from the 2 commissions, and so we do have a few remaining issues. You heard some public speakers tonight. Parking, certainly, kind of behind the school. and behind the library. As Mr. Cohen mentioned, also there's sort of this remaining issue with regard to what, if anything, might be done for the neighboring retailers. As our speaker noted, staff did meet with the retailers to kind of discuss that issue. Clearly not completed at this point. There were also some discussions about, at our most recent meeting, with regard to the construction phasing. We had the discussion about the use permit. Slide 35 in the applicant's presentation showed that construction phasing. As Mr. Knox noted, they're going to be parking most of those vehicles on site, and so there was some reaction from the community about especially the loss of the smaller soccer field that's along Lexington. So there was some reaction to that as well. Another thing that is different with this site, this use permit, is staff endeavored to limit the number of conditions, and we have a memo here from Mr. Duffy kind of outlining that, but I think that's something that we should just ask some questions about to make sure that we understand that. The modifications were mainly to reduce overlap, limit the number of permits that are required, and try to differentiate the fact that this is a school project and not the typical multifamily project that we would see or office project, and so treating it as such. And so, but I think that's ripe for a little bit of discussion to make sure that we understand what's gone and what's still here. And then, I mean, there's the staff report goes over the 2232, which we'll also do tonight. I think Ms. Bowling did a good job of going over that. And then I do have suggested motions. I was writing this memo at 11 o'clock at night, so I put the motions out of order. The first one I'll be making is the 2232 motion, which is the second one listed in your memo, and then I will be intending to move the county board, or sorry, the county manager's recommendation as well, is that. So in the interest of time, I'll leave it there. Happy to kind of answer any questions about our discussion. Hans Baumann, who was the BLPC chair, his letters to the county school board are included in the packet here. So if you have kind of any interest in reading his recommendations, they pretty much mirrored PFRC's, so not too much difference there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Schroll. Commissioner Schroll has suggested the following discussion topics. Let me tick them off and see if there are any additional ones. Under transportation, there's parking, parent pickup drop-off, parking and loading, particularly off North Madison Street, TDM, which I think we could have a little more discussion about, site circulation, walk zones, and any off-site improvements. Then there's construction plans, any structural changes you want to note to the use permit conditions, which have been made more efficient and easy to follow, and anything else. Does anybody have anything else? Yes, Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you, I do. Under number 3, structural changes to the use permit conditions, I just wanted to clarify, under this one, we would talk about the content of the use permit conditions as well as just the structure,
yes.
Right? Okay.
Oh, yes.
And
structural changes in content. Yes, of course.
Okay. And then under other, I assume maybe we could add capacity. That's been raised. And then trees, type, and maintenance.
Good. Anybody else to add? Commissioner Giacomini?
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the screening and see a little more about the planting around the loading dock area. And
particularly at Madison or
yes.
Particularly at Madison? Yes, okay.
As our public speaker raised some issues concerning that, and sometimes landscaping is part of a mitigation. So I'd like to delve into that a little bit.
Absolutely. Okay, with that, yes, oh, so sorry.
No problem. Will the phasing be discussed in the construction plans?
Yes, we can certainly do that. And anybody else? And if something crops up, feel free to just put it at the end of the list. So right now, let's have some discussion on the transportation issues. Let's start with parking generally. Does anyone have? Commissioner Giron?
Okay, so I want to start by saying this is a great design. Wick, you consistently do a beautiful job responding to the community, building up and not out, making it creative and lovely. Discovery is beautiful. I think Alice Fleet's going to be just as nice in the neighborhood. And I also appreciate the challenges that APS faces. For those of you who haven't participated in PFRC for as long as I have, which was starting with Discovery, then Ashland, McKinley, Abingdon, TJ, Stratford, Wilson, and I didn't participate in Reed, we know that the community consistently tells you, we don't want larger class sizes, we don't want different hours, we want more of exactly the same. So I do appreciate the constraints that you have and how much you've accomplished in the last few years. Now I'm going to get into my pet peeve. I understand that we provide free parking to teachers, and I understand why. I've heard this argument before, but not all employers provide free parking in Arlington. And as volunteers sitting up here, we have to pay for parking every time we come or lead a public meeting. And this public free parking, this parking for the teachers, does come at a cost. From the information that you shared, we go from about 26,500 square feet of parking to 50,000 square feet of parking. So that's where we're getting a lot more of our impervious surface area. And it's in areas that were open spaces before. I am curious whether those are APS-owned open spaces or county parkland, but it's not really relevant. I understand why you're doing it. But I do want to know more about why, because if it's true that the walk zone is even close to what Mr. Belinsky shared, and that you have more than enough students to walk, I don't know why we would need so much parking or even the space for drop-offs or even buses. I wonder if we've thought that through adequately enough. And are there other options? I know I've raised this for a long time. If it's going to be free parking for people who come and leave work at about the same time every day, could we consider tandem parking? And if we can't consider something like tandem parking for that last little lot, Mr. Gibson, can you pull that up? I think we see it on page 10. That little lot that comes closer to Washington Boulevard. Is there a way that we could have some sort of dual use of that space? And this is the new lot that you've added. Is there a way to put maybe a double gate on it on the weekend and it can be marked for any sort of sport? This is not my area of expertise, but even if it's hopscotch, because this is not far from me. I typically walk here. It's maybe more than a mile. I've never had a problem finding parking, not for the library, not to go to the beer garden, not for the farmer's market. There's an awful lot of accessible street parking. I appreciate what Mr. Lawson said, and I know that that's an ongoing issue for the businesses there, that they don't want anyone else to use those spaces. But the reality in that neighborhood is people come to the library and then they go to the market and they purchase something there. So I wonder if we need to rethink that model as well. Anyway, this is something that does bother me, and I'd love to hear what my fellow commissioners think about it, and if there's any room for us to have a paradigm shift in terms of this death by 1,000 cuts on APS grounds for parking.
Commissioner Giron, would you like perhaps a quick response from APS on the various shifts that Commissioner Giron has been thinking about for many, many years now, it seems, and perhaps staff could comment too. Are there creative ways, new ways, out-of-the-box thinking to shrink the amount of parking? I mean, I understand once you shrink parking, you have others saying, well, then they're going to just park in front of my house. And so setting that aside, what about the design of the site? Is there anything you'd like to contribute right now?
Well, I think as far as free parking for teachers, that's not something the design and construction will do. That's something the school board would have to pick up, so I'm not going to comment on that. We always try to put as little parking on a site as we can, because anything we put into parking takes away from what we provide students. So if we could have parking elsewhere, we would be fine with that.
Is there a reason we don't consider tandem parking? I know they use it at other schools and even businesses in Arlington.
Tandem parking works best when you have staff that work exactly the same hours, and teachers don't necessarily work the same hours if they're doing other things with the students. So
Some do, though, and this has come up every time, and I'm sorry I'm pushing it, but I have an opportunity. Some of them do work the same hours, more than most other employers. And I'm not talking 3 deep, 2 deep, maybe part of the parking lot. I'm curious how much open space we could save if we would consider something like that.
Hello, Robert Cheezel from transportation planning firm of Grove Slade Associates. Obviously, we had a lot of debate and discussion on the parking. Big picture-wise, the main issues that we found here are not numbers issues. We did talk about how in a quarter mile there are a lot of spaces surrounding this site, and a lot of them are available, which led to thinking, obviously, you could see if you go through the documents how we have tried to reduce from the zoning requirement as much as possible. But the main issues here became how do we make sure that the project does not have a detrimental impact to the various stakeholders in the area. And we learned that although there was a numbers problem, in order to make sure that there wasn't an impact, you had to look at various operational and management solutions to make sure that certain parking wasn't more desirable. To get the people to separate and to the uses you wanted, you needed to make some more desirable to them, some less desirable to them. So a lot of the solutions we tried to discuss are things like making library visiting parking more desirable on the site than instead of across the street in the retail, because right now it's somewhat the opposite. A lot of the lots fill up before the library even opens because of the APS staff on it, and the closest parking is right next to the retail. Hence, a lot of the ideas we had were what type of things can we do to get different behavior.
This is fascinating, but why don't we consider tandem parking for some of the teachers?
I'm getting there. At some point, you can keep changing that dial, increasing the amount of operations and management and policy things you change, including things like tandem parking. The question is, at what point do you become so cumbersome that then you will start having behavior where people are parking across the street or not using the tandem parking? So when I looked at all of the different uses we had and what we thought were viable tools and management solutions, that's kind of where we got to the number of where we are.
To be clear, you think if we gave teachers free parking on the site in one of these lots, but it was tandem, that they would end up parking in the neighborhood in one of the areas you don't want them to park, in front of someone's house or in the shopping center? Yeah?
Yeah, in a way that could classify it as having a drawback, a negative impact to certain blocks on the street.
And you don't think there's a way we can mitigate against that?
These were discussions we had, and this is where we got to. I do think that, like the report that we wrote actually has a lower parking number than 133. It does think that we can slide certain things towards lower numbers, and we did discuss going even lower on the parking number at points. We had that discussion as soon as we saw the results of that, but it was kind of a consensus about that we thought we were right on that scale between solutions and how much we were going to solve the parking with operations and management solutions versus how much we were going to add additional spaces.
Thank you, and thank you, commissioners, for indulging me. I know this looks small on this site, but I was just counting. I guess this is the 8th school in 6 or 7 years, and it really, cumulatively, it does eat up our open space. Thank you.
And this is why we look for citizens like yourself to serve on the commission.
Say it over and over.
Commissioner Schroll, and then Commissioner Lantelmi, and then Commissioner.
Mr. Gibson, kind of following up on Commissioner Guerin's questions, can you remind me, staff only counts the spaces that border the site, correct? The on-street spaces that directly border the site? Correct.
So the way the zoning ordinance is written, that is what is implied. In other cases, such as McKinley, where the community was heavily involved in doing this balancing act between how much parking the schools accommodate the local neighborhood roadways and how much is on site. So it's largely a product of the process. So could there be less parking on this site? Yes. Would reducing the parking on the site have a different outcome from the community discussion here at the commission tonight about what that balance is? We can't say. We don't have that in front of you. So part of this is you guys advising the board on how to look at the policy broadly, not just isolated site by site. And as our cost and constraints change and values change, and our acceptance for use of public right-of-way for public uses is further codified and recognized, then things may shift, hopefully, in future projects where we commit less open space to parking.
So, Commissioner Schroll.
Yeah, Mr. Gibson, thank you for clarifying that. Commissioner Gearin and my other fellow commissioners, we did discuss at PFRC maybe counting more of the on-street spaces. That was a desire of some of the PFRC and BLPC members. I can't say it was a unanimous position, and certainly members of the surrounding community didn't feel like they wanted to do that. So it was something that did get discussed, and Ms. Kim, who was the staff member for this project, essentially during the process gave an answer very similar to Mr. Gibson's.
Commissioner Lantelmi, did you have something?
Yeah, and this would be a design issue. Of course, with the parking lot the size it is, there could be design changes that, while the physical size of the parking lot and the number of cars would be the same, but it might, and it doesn't help for open space and kids playing, but for stormwater purposes, it could help if where the actual stalls would be permeable rather than hard asphalt. That's a design issue. It might cost a little more, I'm not sure, but is that something that could be looked at? Because then you would have less impermeable coverage.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Hughes, I think, was next.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Question for APS staff, sort of a follow-up to Commissioner Gearing. I understand, and I think it might have even been suspended, that schools has a TDM incentive program for teachers not to park, basically. What methods are used or methods to validate that a teacher is in fact not parking in the neighborhood and instead is using a form of mass transit or walking to and from the school vice using the free parking?
Actually, right now we're reworking the policy. There have not been safeguards that needed to be put in place, so we are actually reworking the policy, and with the budget crunch, there are some incentives that don't exist right now. But the conversation is still going on.
Thank you. A follow-up then for the fellow commissioners and a continuance of Commissioner Gearing's original question. Commissioner Gearing, I, as one of the few commissioners who I think lives in those neighborhood spots that people desperately try to think about avoiding, and the fact that my current spot is not a residential parking restricted zone, and the teachers do use it for parking, many of which don't display any type of parking permit, makes me curious as to the effectiveness of a validation method for such incentives. That also being said, I do want to encourage staff on the county side. I heard them speak just a moment about constraints associated with sites. And as a reminder that the public right-of-way should be equally treated across our public domain, wherever and always, wherever it is.
Commissioner Weir, and then Commissioner McSweeney.
So following up, this is more of a comment to my fellow commissioners, but following up on Commissioner Gearin's comments, and in almost complete agreement with Commissioner Hughes' comments about the public nature of the public right-of-way, I just want to share that I'm becoming increasingly skeptical about whether the construction of new surface parking can be substantially compatible with Arlington's comprehensive plan. I don't know that I'm quite willing to say that it's not, at least in this vote, but just for the benefit of my fellow commissioners, that's a question that I'm actually asking myself every time I see additional surface parking planned to be built on a public space.
Commissioner McSweeney, and then Commissioner Ricks.
Thank you. So there are many things I want to add, so I'm going to try to do it quickly. The first is I've asked this question. You know, we've been on some of these groups together, and I've asked these questions of APS staff. I think while I'm not a human resources expert, the answer I got back was that we are having a problem actually getting teachers to teach in Arlington. We used to not have much of a problem because we were the highest paying jurisdiction. That is no longer the case. And so taking away a benefit such as parking when teachers can go out to Loudoun and Fairfax and park for free is seen as taking away. But that was implied perhaps by one of the questions. I do agree with you though, tandem parking and creative use of the space we do have is something we should be looking at. I would just mention that coming out of the Career Center Working Group, which we also were both part of, and knowing that there is such a tension between, say, the immediate neighbors who really don't want people to park on their streets, and trying to balance the cost, the incredible cost, actually, not only in terms of actual open space, but in terms of money to create those spaces, especially when you're talking, as we were at the Career Center Working Group, of going underground. This is a bigger conversation than just pertaining to the Reed School. This is an APS issue that they need assistance with from the county. And as a result, I did send a letter to our county board chair and also the two liaisons, one from the school board and one from the county board, to our Joint Commission for Transportation Choices, JCTC, and asked that the county and APS together do a parking study to figure out, and building on the good work that the Mobility Lab has done in association with some other groups, take a look at where we have empty parking garages, in some cases that the county has put money into. And also having an understanding, to put it bluntly, that people don't own the public right-of-way in front of their house. It is not theirs. And neighbors believe it is theirs. And we have to change this in Arlington. And I think education and public conversation about this is what we need to do. We all live in civic associations, and we all know that our neighbors believe the public right-of-way is their place to park. But that has to change because it's infrastructure we all have paid for. It is public.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Ricks.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the either staff or the applicant to explain more about the loading service area. What size trucks are coming in? Oh, I thought this was.
Can you hold off on that?
Transportation.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
We'll come back to you. But on general parking, Commissioner Schroll?
Mr. Gibson, one of our speakers mentioned his desire to see the spaces in front of the post office, the diagonal spaces reallocated. It is in the public right-of-way. They're in county right-of-way, correct? I was wondering if you could maybe react to that proposal or provide us with maybe an update if there has been discussions about that.
Okay. So we've had, these projects give us an incredible opportunity to look not just at the site, but also a broader picture of the community. And through the communications with the businesses and looking at the utilization of this civic site and the commercial site, which really create the village of Westover Village, we looked at parking utilization along Washington Boulevard, along McKinley, and portions of 18th, and are going to reprogram the street utilization so that not just in front of the shopping center where those spaces are now going to be managed as public spaces, and as 2-hour short-term high turnover spaces, we're going to expand those 2-hour zones to other frontages along the library, along the school edges, and further along both sides of Washington Boulevard. So you have high turnover, you have your parking spaces designated for high turnover uses in areas that you really want to create that high turnover. And so I think that's why we had the speaker today supporting the project as proposed, and we continue to work with APS and the community to appropriately manage the right-of-way.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gibson.
Anyone else question, comment on this subject? I just have one quick question. Is the free parking considered part of a teacher's salary? It sort of is an in-kind benefit. I don't know how the tax code looks at it, but how do you consider it? You don't consider it as part of their compensation package?
I think whenever they're hiring teachers, if it's discussed, they aren't charged parking. They let them know that they're not charged parking. But yes, would it be an issue? I'm sure it would be if you started charging teachers for parking.
For parking, then the compensation would come in. Okay, that was just a clarifying question on my part. Yes, Commissioner Morton.
I noticed in the multimodal transportation analysis, I was surprised to see the choice of staff is 89% arrive by automobile, despite, I think you're, 8/10 of a mile from the metro. Is there any kind of TDM program that you've instituted, or is this a similar percentage to other schools across the county?
Let me see. The average is 85% driving alone and 3% carpooling among all APS staff. We looked at the closest schools nearby, Swanson Middle School and McKinley Middle School. Swanson is 82% drive and 4% carpool. McKinley Elementary School, which is a little further away, is 88% drive, 0% carpool. They're all in that 80s range as far as driving for staff. I think a few schools dip below 80, but in the schools we've worked with that are in the 70s for drive, it's actually just a higher walk and bike percentage. They just are in denser neighborhoods, and it's not actually a higher transit percentage.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else on this subject? If not, let's move on to drop-off, the drop-off question. Anybody?
Yeah.
Commissioner Schroll?
I was wondering if APS could speak to why the pickup drop-off along 18th McKinley has a 30-car queue. This is supposed to be a neighborhood school. Why is there a 30-car queue?
As part of the transportation analysis, we looked at other neighborhood schools that run in the county and looked at their queuing and parking, or how many parents and guardians are picking up and dropping them off. We also looked at the survey data that parents at other neighborhood APS schools gave and try to correlate what we saw out in field and what the surveys were also indicating. And then we looked at various ways you can look at those, and actually some of the schools we went had much longer not longer queues, but more cars parked at the same time waiting for people, to match up with their, the students they were picking up. So we came to that conclusion based on what schools we thought were doing the best job and had the shorter queues, and what we think could be done here with the proper infrastructure, geometrical setup of the queuing space, and that's where we came to that recommendation.
And I think the other thing that we have to look at is worst case scenario, because even if you have all your kids walk on a rainy day, a lot of parents drive.
Well, we don't design our places for the day after Thanksgiving. So, Mr. Schiessel, in your professional experience, are the places that are designed poorly, are they correlated to less queuing, fewer cars coming to the spots? If it's not as easy to do fewer parents decide to do that? Or if you have a 40-car queue here, would you see more parents deciding?
No, in general, the quality of the pickup drop-off experience, I don't see having a huge correlation. I see that the ability for teachers and school staff to organize the queue and match, especially in dismissal in the afternoon, the ability to match students with cars is really what creates the queue. And that, in fact, when we first started looking at some of this data, I was trying to parse out all the different data from the APS Go surveys and all the neighborhood schools and try to figure out trends. There seems to be pretty set numbers. Like a lot of the mode splits, how many students take the bus or walk or get picked up or dropped off, don't swing too much one way or the other. It seems like there's a certain subset of the population, probably parents that are on their way to work, that are always going to drop off or pick up. And then you can move the dial on some schools one way or another, but none of it really changes by huge areas. Kind of like what I was saying is the more transit next to a school, we don't see a huge shift in staff on transit. It's more, what we find is when a school is situated in a dense neighborhood, we find more bike walk. But there still aren't huge moves between county facilities, including the quality of the pickup drop-off area.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schiesel.
Thank you very much. Anybody else on pickup drop-off? Right, let's move to parking and loading off North Madison. Oh, so sorry.
So I do think that to take a step back from the sheer number of queued vehicles, we should also look at good design for this. And I think that a lot of this area that's appropriated in the parking lot is as much about good, safe design for these activities. One of the principles that you want to try to do is separate the place where the kids are getting picked up and drop off from the parked vehicles that may be maneuvering in and out. So that's why you have the sort of two layers in this lot design. And then given the number of spaces that you're providing for the length of the lot, it was inappropriate to make the lot go into the site very deep, so it was better to provide it along the roadway frontage. And so part of this is a matter of, the combination of the pickup and drop off and the loading and the parking lot design coming to what you see there. Having observed, say, Discovery after it was built, where we had a lot of discussion of pickup and drop off, we've found that, it's not as bad as we think when we're going through these processes, but it's still the ability to change or reduce this there's not a lot that you could really change in the design.
Yeah, that's helpful. I want to see as many people walking and biking to this, and we'll get to some of the offsite improvements and walk zone piece later, but that's something that I know some people on PFRC and BLPC wanted, was to make sure that we were kind of achieving that as well. So thank you to you both.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibson. Okay, moving on to parking loading off North Madison. Commissioner Ricks?
Yeah, I just wanted to get more clarification on the path of service and deliveries. I'm assuming it comes off of Washington through 18th, then a left onto North Madison and back down into the loading dock? Is that how it works? And then if you could just clarify this, the size vehicles that are regularly coming to the school and what their approximate daily trips are.
Okay. That's pretty much the direction we would anticipate a vehicle to come in. Essentially, what we are looking at are basically like a stake body sized truck. They're not the full tractor trailer. Any tractor trailer deliveries would come to the front of the building. And then we have trash trucks that would come to the back of the building. We anticipate, based on the other schools that we have that have 700 students plus or minus, it's approximately 13 on average pick up and drop off, a day or a week. And that would include the mail delivery, which is daily. So it's not a lot of high volume. And I think the one thing that we have to work with is we have state contract with regard to our food service delivery, and we have delivery that comes between, I think it's 6:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon is when it's contracted. We can request a later delivery, but it's not guaranteed because it's set up by how does that truck make its deliveries and what's the most efficient for them to make their deliveries. They don't bounce back and forth if they are delivering, say, to all APS schools. They have a circuit that they make to drop off, but we can request, but we can't specify that you can't be here before 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or anything. That was one of the comments. But
Thank you. And I think you said, so tractor trailers would come via McKinley and park in front of the school?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. And just one other comment. It might be naive, but I was just curious and this is sort of a site circulation question as well. Was there any thought, or is it even practical to consider a service entrance only from Washington Street through this new parking lot to get to the loading dock, rather than going through the residential streets?
I think the one thing, we'd have to work with VDOT with regard to that, and we don't think we would be able to get a permit because we're so close to the intersection at McKinley and Washington Boulevard. So it was a concern. We actually looked at that for parking. The other thing is if you make that opportunity, you are going to have tractor trailers pulling in there, thinking that they can get to the dock because of their GPS and satellite view that they're going to have, and then they're going to get in there, and then they're not going to be able to turn around. So, I mean, there are issues with regard to that as well. But yes, that was considered as having an in-only was one of the options we looked at, and we also looked at an in-out.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner Giacomini.
Yes, I had some further questions about the loading dock operations. You were indicating that it's difficult for the food trucks to alter their schedule. You can ask, but you can't guarantee. What time is staff available to greet the truck? I'm assuming it doesn't just come and leave stuff on the doorstep.
I think some deliveries do. They have a key to an outside door sometimes with the deliveries. But generally, staff is there early. I can't say, I'd have to talk to our food service director as to what time staff is in. But it's, if they're expecting a delivery, somebody would have to be there at 6:30 to meet them.
And how would they know that they have to be there at 6:30 if they...
It's a scheduled delivery.
But you just said you couldn't schedule deliveries.
It's scheduled, the order that they make the deliveries, you know, week to week when they're coming. It's not generally, oh, we come at 10 this week, we're coming at 11 because of having to be met.
But you can't ask that a delivery be at 8 a.m.
Correct. Because they set up their delivery schedules in a sequence that is most efficient for them to deliver. I go to
Because
this
they
building.
might not be delivering to the same set of schools each week?
Well, they probably do the same delivery every time they deliver, but they do it in the same order to the same facilities.
Now I'm really confused, because if that's the case, then why can't you say that for Reed, you come at 8 a.m.?
Well, they may end up being on the other side of the county, and then we have to go down here, and then we have to go back up to the other side of the county for the next delivery.
I don't understand that. You just said it's the same schools that they deliver each week.
I'm assuming because of...
Maybe we shouldn't assume. Maybe we should ask. I'm just suggesting.
We have asked food service if we can request a time, and it's no, because the company that delivers has their own logistics, and they set it up in the order that they deliver, and we can't change that. We can request.
If I could just jump in, when will you know? It sounds to me like there is going to be a point when you will know what that route is and where the school will be on that route. And it could be 8 o'clock. You just won't know that
Correct.
till it gets set up.
Put into the cycle, correct.
Put into the cycle.
But I think I understood you to say the cycle could change week from week.
I didn't hear that.
No.
It would be the same cycle.
Would be my guess. Based on logistics of working with food service delivery people in the past, that's generally what they do.
I think it would be helpful for the neighbors as we think about Reed getting blended into some of the cafeteria workings, because we have some time.
I will get the direct conversation, and we'll share it. We did ask food service, and they said, no, we can request when it comes, but we can't tell them when to
And
deliver.
perhaps we could probe them a little further. You know, sometimes one question begets another, but we don't always ask that next question. So some of that discussion might be good. That would be, I think that would be helpful.
I will get more information.
That would be great. Thank you very much. Because we may find ourselves in another situation where we have a loading dock so close to single-family homes. I can't think of one off the top of my head. This seems to be a little different of a design.
Abingdon.
Abingdon?
It's right next to Fairlington's townhouses. And
That one. I was thinking about some of the others, and I couldn't. Discovery too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we can talk about screening maybe under other. But before I leave this topic, Mr. Gibson, would you remind us if there is a standard site plan condition that we use for deliveries when we are involved with a mixed-use building? I know we've had discussions about this, particularly over at the building near the Peck, what I still call the Peck site. Do we have such things, or do we do them on a case-by-case basis?
So we had one, and it was probably a case-by-case condition that then got standardized. The derivation of it was typically that we didn't want on-street loading to occur or loading activities to occur during rush hours, mainly so that you wouldn't disrupt traffic flow. That was the original idea of those conditions. The early hours are otherwise prohibited by by the noise ordinance and things like that. So it's evolved over time. That is not a standard condition today, and there are some projects which we continue to look at the impacts and appropriate service for loading.
And you had reminded me that there is some noise ordinance about delivery within our zoning code?
It's not specifically deliveries, it's about the noise that
Right.
deliveries make. And so if those delivery activities, if you're quiet as a church mouse, you're not gonna have a violation of the noise ordinance. And you're not gonna have a disruption to the neighborhood. If you are a loud operating activity, and I can't really give you a specific example of what might classify each different thing, but if you are louder than the noise ordinance would permit a regular occurrence on something that we could document, then we would enforce that.
Great. Thank you. So going back to schools, Jeff, tell me, now that we know that or we believe that we can't really deal with food service, although we'll be exploring that, what about trash removal? And what types of vehicles do you use? Do you have dumpsters?
it's a dumpster and it's a trash truck pickup.
And so it's over the top, make lots of noise, wangle it, and then put it back down on the ground kind of operation?
I don't recall off the top of my head if it's a dump from the top or it's a dump from the back. I don't recall.
So what kind of schedule is that on? What type of schedule is that on? Does it come in the morning? Does it come in the evening?
I will ask the question.
Morning.
I'm just really trying to ask this because I think the neighbors have been sincere and they've been
The trash is
worried.
currently in the back of the building and it is picked up when it's picked up. I don't know when that is at this current time, but we can find out. And we're actually tucking it back into the building and it's not out in the middle of the parking lot like it currently is.
I do always worry about that, about how it really works operationally, because there's even some of our mixed-use buildings that are brand new. For a while, the building that took where the Blue Goose used to be had a dumpster sitting outside of its garage and was actually doing trash that way. It's not doing that anymore. They were reported, but I'm just saying, for all of our best intentions, sometimes something else happens. So it would be good to know the schedule.
I have a note to ask our operations people.
That's good. Thank you.
But I think I heard you say that the trash is collected inside.
In theory.
Did the design of this building requires the trash be collected inside? No, that's incorrect. It will be outside. And that's county pickup trash, right? That's what we're talking about.
It's contracted pickup, yeah. It's contracted
Contracted,
pickup.
not
Because we have the recycle and we have the trash. And they're
By contract, so it's not the county's schedule. Okay, Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. I do completely support Commissioner Giacomini's asking for us to get a little more information about these times, you know, and what the play is in terms of the times. I would, however, just caution us or just remind us that students, especially students who receive free and reduced lunch, get breakfast in the morning. And oftentimes, I know at my elementary school down the street from me, the cafeteria staff actually start arriving between 5:30 and 6 to prepare breakfast. So there may be some limitations in terms of how late something like that could be arranged.
Thank you, Commissioner McSweeney. All right. Shall we move on? Anything else? Well, let us move on to TDM. I think we heard from our speaker that it's felt that the complete details of the TDM are yet to be worked out. But are there some in the conditions? Can we perhaps have APS respond? Where are we with, what is the status of the TDM measures to be taken? At this point, what do we know? What don't we know?
It's actually in the use permit information.
There's a condition, but it's
there's
it's
actually,
vague,
it's probably
isn't it?
the largest condition in the, I don't know what's available yet.
It's
You said condition
16A,
16A,
45.
45, 46.
6,
Page 45.
page 45. Okay, page 45, 46.
May I ask a question on the TDM?
Go ahead, yes, please.
Question for APS. Just a couple questions. So the school board recently took action to limit the incentives for walking and biking for teachers, correct?
It's on hold, I believe, is the actual terminology.
And so I don't think I saw any walk, bike incentives here, and that would be consistent.
I think that
Consistency with that.
we have two schools, I believe, that there was a funding amount put in to the TDM, which was outdated, and then the rest of it says, as made available by the superintendent.
Okay.
I think is how it's currently worded in most of the TDMs that we have.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty frustrating. I know that's not your decision here, and that's the school boards and the superintendents, but I think it's frustrating that we're talking about reducing parking, and one of the ways we can do that is by providing incentives for folks to take non-single occupancy vehicle trips. And so I think we just need to flag that. Nothing we can do, I don't think, about this particular site or this use permit before us, but it's a frustrating place to be when that's one of the cheaper ways to reduce the parking we need to produce, perhaps, and increase park space and other things.
So reading the condition, the TDM is pretty well articulated on page 45, 46 of the staff report, which you can get online, or you can have this copy if you'd like to read it through. I can give it to you. Is there anything else on TDM?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Sorry,
I
Commissioner.
wanted to follow up some more with, I'm sorry you guys are just sort of my target this evening, but I just, there's just so many things that come up with transportation, and I wanted to continue with Commissioner Schroll's questioning because I was surprised when I read about the diminution, or not diminution, the elimination of funds. And I wondered, Mr. Gibson, how that played into some of the TDMs that were in use permits for schools that we had already approved. So I take it that the superintendent's action has not put anybody in non-compliance with use permits?
That's my understanding.
And so that was the leisure demand that we did about as the superintendent's discretion. Would that be correct?
So there's varying conditions for the multiple schools that have been approved, generally since Yorktown, that have TDM requirements. We looked at all of them while the superintendent was discussing this to provide feedback through the manager on the policy. We found that none of the conditions were explicitly violated, and then there were only a couple that had specific requirements, and APS was continuing to commit to those.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to site circulation. Does anybody have comment, question? Moving on then, walk zones and any off-site improvements. I think Commissioner Schroll wanted to make a comment.
Question for you, Mr. Gibson. In the discussion of this project, I think Mr. Schiesel and his colleagues identified some places in the surrounding neighborhood that might need some mitigation. Patrick Henry came up, and a couple other sites as well. I'm wondering if you could speak to any discussion of any maybe future site improvements or that staff might be considering. I'm sure we're not going to be considering any this evening, but just wondering if there's sort of any in the queue perhaps that might be added down the road.
So I don't know of any specific ones that have been added to our capital plan as a result of these. These studies that that APS is using and producing both for this site and all of our sites are very beneficial in that they help the community provide a roadmap for requesting improvements, and then the county prioritizing those improvements across our capital plan. And so we absolutely encourage the neighborhoods to embrace these recommendations and continue to bring them forward. We do look at high incident areas and solve those accordingly, but there's unfortunately a limited amount of resources, and right now there's nothing specific associated with this site that's immediately adjacent to the site that is proposed.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there was certainly a fair amount of discussion, I think, of the participants of making sure that as many of the zones could be included in the walk zone as possible. It was, I know, a desire of many of the people on the committees and also those who just attended meetings. So as, you know, to the extent that those things could be done to kind of increase that, I think that would be good. Mr. Chambers, is there kind of any update on the walk zone discussion? I know that was a parallel discussion. It wasn't something you were leading, but I was wondering if you could have kind of any update tonight.
I have no updates. It's another department is actually handling that, as you know.
Putting you on the spot, Mr. Chambers.
It's fine. That's why I'm here.
Anything else? Walk zones and off-site improvements. Then let's move on to construction plans and phasing. Commissioner Morton, thought that was something you raised.
Yeah, that was a helpful
slide 35.
Your explanation of the phasing was helpful for me to understanding why you're doing it the way you're doing. I was wondering whether there was any provision, because I found that compelling in the comments of Mr. Bauman, you know, that the neighborhood is concerned about losing complete access to the recreational facilities. Is there any way to open part of it ahead of time, or is it you need to have for the entire construction period that roped off?
Really, it comes down to safety. It also comes down to parking, so it really comes down to dollars and safety. That site, if anybody's been on a construction site, is very dangerous, just for somebody casually walking through. And we take that very seriously. We currently have multiple sites under construction, and you know, you may think that you can have some space available, and you can't. You have to open it, close it, open it, and close it. And people think that they can have access because they did last week, and it becomes very difficult. But there's unintended things laying on the ground, sharp objects, whatever, that can pierce a shoe. Safety wear on a job site, anytime you're inside a fence, you have to have hard-soled shoes, you have to have a vest so somebody doesn't run into you, you have to have a hard hat, eye protection. I've seen people walk on a job site and got sliced and have no idea how they got a cut on their leg. It's just one of those things that we need to keep people safe, and we have the opportunity to close this site off, have our parking all on site, have everything self-contained so that we aren't overflowing into the neighborhood. We don't have construction workers with their lunch pails walking down the street and finding a parking space somewhere. We don't have the requirement to purchase parking, so to speak, or rent a church like we have in the past, but we have to identify to the community where we are going to have construction workers park. So we're going to have them parking on this site. We have lay down on this site. The other thing is we're going to basically strip the entire site and replace it and repair it, and the fields are going to be better than they were. We also, even once the work is done, they're going to have to rest, so they're going to still be behind fence, and people are going to be tempted by the green grass on the other side. But we really need to get them established and up and you know, in place, and it takes time to do that. We can't have people in and out of the spaces. The exception is that rear parking lot. You know, we're going to try to phase that so it can become available, so it can become a cut-through, so people could walk through it. And the other thing is Westover Market. We're committed to making sure Westover Market can operate. We're going to be working with them as we go through, and when we get closer to the time, they need to know in plenty of time so they know whether they're going to do the summer layout in the winter because of access. That may be what we have to do. We're hoping they can do their winter layout and be on the sidewalk, but we have to see when that work at that frontage is actually going to happen, or when there's 4-story construction going up where we can't really have anybody underneath that space. So we have to look at all of those things. And we do, the good thing is we do have our contractors already on board. They're already looking at things and how this is going to work. But you know, construction takes time, and it's a dangerous site, and you know, we want to make sure everybody stays safe, and the community, you know, can watch it from a distance and you know, see what's going on.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Commissioner Lantelmi, and then Commissioner Hughes.
Looking on this chart here, the construction parking in yellow up on the there, that's the sledding hill. Is that actually going to be workable for parking? Because you're not going to dig it out, are you?
The sledding hill is actually between that yellow and the blue.
Okay.
The parking would be on the top where there's currently a small soccer field, which would be restored as a better soccer field. And I believe there actually is a curb cut off of Lexington there for them to get in and out of. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you. Question for the applicant. This is a perfect slide. What percentage of the existing building will be demolished during the construction phase? And can you confirm that my reading is correct, that that building is 10 years old and LEED Gold certified?
I don't, do you have the square footage? The line that where you can see the I don't know if it's a Z or 2 Ls, that 2-story section. You see the curve that comes around, and it's a 1-story section, but the 2-story section, if you take on the right-hand side and go straight up, that's where the cut would be. The 1-story section with the curve is what gets removed. And it's, I don't know if we have the exact square footage, but it's about half of the building is going to be removed.
And can you confirm that it was constructed 10 years ago to LEED Gold standards?
That's correct.
So 50% of a building that was constructed 10 years ago to LEED Gold standards will be demolished in the process of the approval of this use permit amendment?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Great, let's move on to the use permit conditions. Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you.
Is it a structure question or a content question?
Content questions.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. The first one I have is relating to the trees, the maintenance and replacement of the trees. And I believe that might be new item number 5 in our standard use permit conditions. The question actually is twofold. One was the question about the trees that were going in that was raised by the Urban Forestry Committee. And they were hoping that there could be larger trees. I believe that maybe there were some service berries, and they were hoping that you could look at creating or putting in larger trees.
Yeah, we've already agreed to do that with Urban Forestry
Oh,
after our
great.
meeting. That's not a
Okay.
problem.
And the second is about maintenance and replacement. I'm wondering where in the use permit conditions it talks about who's responsible for maintaining the trees and for what period. The reason I raise this is because, for instance, at Wakefield, most of the trees on one part of the school have actually died. And there was an issue as to who was supposed to be taking care of them. So I just wanted to make sure that it's actually addressed in the use permit, that it's very clear who takes care of them and then how they get replaced, if they get replaced.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner McSweeney. The condition is it's number 5F in the use permit conditions.
And could you just describe that condition for me? What do we think is happening and who's responsible?
Yes, so this condition explains that Arlington Public Schools agrees to maintain the site and they agree to water, prune, replace, and provide for any other necessary maintenance for the trees and landscaping associated with the school property for the life of the use permit.
So just from a process perspective, how does APS do that? Is it staff at the school that is supposed to take care of it, or is it the larger facilities?
I think the way I understand the use permit is it's contracted service that we would have to maintain the planting, so it will be dollars from other places that will pay for the trees. What we did on Discovery, which was since Wakefield, we had, I believe it was 2 years maintenance of those trees, and they actually, I think, with a few exceptions, survived very well, and that's what we've actually implemented into our contract. The thing is we really can't keep, we can have the contractor responsible for up to 2 years, but we can't really push it beyond that because then it's maintenance, it's not construction, so it's a different procurement. So we have to look at that, but the 2 years seem to work. It used to always be 1 year. In fact, Abingdon is 1 year. We actually had some trees stressed in the summer of last year and some grass that was stressed out, and it's all been reseeded, and those trees have already been replanted. And if you go by Wakefield, I believe all those trees you're referring to have been replaced again.
Have they? Okay. I haven't been at Wakefield for a couple of months.
Yes, and it's APS's responsibility.
Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. I wanted to also ask about the fields and lights. Can you tell me where in the site plan, I think we should take the lessons of Williamsburg, and can you tell me where in the site plan, or I'm sorry, the standard use permit conditions, we've indicated whether or not there will be lights on the field and the hours that they would be lit? And if it's not relevant here, tell me that as well.
It's not relevant in this case.
So there will be no lights on any of the fields?
Correct.
During the design, we did discuss the fact of the fields are going to be just like they are now. They're just going to be improved, and they're going to be 2 rectangular fields and a baseball, softball field that's used by the community just like it is now.
So for another school, is there a place where that would fit into the standard use conditions? I just didn't see it. And here I'm looking at the memo.
So from the memo's perspective, anything regarding the public use of facilities, by the way, I'm Aaron Schreiber at the Planning Division, specifically as you see in the memo that was provided by the Planning Director, that's something that would be tailored to this specific project. So it would all depend upon what that school is providing, because the recreational facilities that are provided with schools, they're not the same on each one. So we would have to look at what was discussed throughout the public process. If they were providing lights, we would tailor the condition accordingly. Same thing regarding the MOU. So it's, it really is a case-by-case basis. And specifically to the case of Reed, since they are not providing any lighted fields, it's not addressed here. They're really just providing what is shown on the use permit plan, and then they'll be maintaining it accordingly.
So I think I would feel more comfortable, though, in the general memo where I think there are placeholders for all possibilities, at least that's what I would have expected here, that we put a placeholder in for lights in schools, just so that we are upfront and transparent with the community that some fields will have lights. Does that seem like a reasonable request? Is that something you could look at doing?
I think we want to speak specifically to the Reed conditions rather than the memo that was provided for by way of reference just to provide additional information. So I think we can have a separate discussion about that memorandum.
Oh, so this I'm sorry, so we're not really discussing this memorandum tonight?
No, that is not an item of discussion. You can discuss that, I think, during your general business.
Talking about the staff memorandum attached to the...
The Planning and Transportation Commission members from Robert Duffy, standard use permit conditions for APS projects. That's actually what I'm referring to. Not specifically the Reed School, since you've told me now that they don't have lights. Is this not something we are discussing tonight?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And from a general perspective, you're recommending that...
I'm asking whether it's reasonable to ask if we could put something in here, a placeholder, to the general memorandum. I think so too, but I'm asking. A general placeholder for lights on fields. And I don't know where you think that would go, but...
May or may not be lit? Is that what you're
right.
recommending?
I think we should be transparent and say that.
So, kind of following up on your answer, Mr. Schreiber, I understand that this was produced as sort of a memo generally about the conditions, and these aren't obviously the conditions before us, but the consolidation of the conditions which led to the production of this memo is something that's before us. So I think it's relevant in the sense that we're dealing with new conditions as a commission, and so sort of understanding that new universe, I think is useful. And also understanding kind of what got eliminated. And so I know in discussions with staff, it's not as easy as doing a track changes because it would be a really complicated looking document is my understanding. I mean, Mr. Duffy does lay out kind of what got eliminated, but it would be nice to see some kind of chart or something from the old to the new at some point, not this evening, obviously, whether it's at LRPC or some future point to know sort of what we're dealing with. I think the objectives are great. I think trying to streamline the process and save money is a good aim, but I think folks just want to know sort of at some future point where we are.
So would that be relatively easy to do a matrix of all the old conditions, how they map on the new ones, what ones were eliminated? Can we do that?
I think it's something that we can take under consideration in terms of how they're, we posted these, we provided these for general information. Just the purpose of this memo, just so everybody is understanding, we just wanted to, this was something that was directly tasked to the Planning Division or CPHD by the County Board. We just wanted to provide additional information for those who were viewing the conditions just to see how we got to this point. And so it's something that we can consider just showing you specifically which conditions were eliminated. But as Mr. Schroll mentioned, it's a little bit, looking at a track change comparison is not relevant. It's very confusing. The main thing, as explained here in this memo that I prepared, is that we were trying to eliminate the general confusion which occurs on every single project for schools, is that the conditions that we have used up until this point with Reed is that we were treating schools like they were a mixed-use development project, and the construction schedules are not the same. They're not even similar. Whereas a school can get issued one permit, our old conditions had them checking in on every potential permit that could occur, whereas Mr. Chambers can tell you not every school that they build will have an excavation, sheeting, and shoring permit. It's just not relevant, and so we had so many prerequisites that had to be met, so we were trying to condense that. So in terms of just providing additional information for the Planning Commission in terms of how we got to this point to show you which ones were eliminated, because what I tried to do was provide buckets of information, kind of the categories, and we can kind of give you a little bit more information at a future date if you're that interested in terms of just showing you, a condition 62 was eliminated where it used to say intentionally omitted, we just eliminated it. Or where it was just stating a code requirement saying that you wouldn't violate the noise ordinance. We didn't think it was necessary to have that type of condition.
Right. That was my understanding of what this exercise was to be. However, since you raised the issue of lights and you raised Williamsburg, it seemed to me that if there were language to consider to include on lights, I would like to see language that requires site design to be done in such a way that the lights would be less intrusive. That's what I think we found with Williamsburg, that the way the fields were designed, it appeared that the later construction of lights on the field to extend the time and play were intrusive because the fields weren't designed in such a way that a nuisance could be minimized. And so if we are considering additional substantive changes to APS on lights and turf, that also might be a way to line up with what comes out of POPs about lights and turf. And that exercise is not yet complete, but we struggled so painfully and long with Williamsburg. I think it would be an opportunity perhaps to think a little more deeply about that issue.
Sure, and I think that that's something that we can consider through further discussions with APS, but I would also just remind you that lights are an exceptionally contextual sensitive topic, and that once again, no two schools are going to have the same contextual relationship. So for example, doing lights on a field at Wilson School is very different than doing lights here at this school. And so it's difficult to come up with what you would consider a standard type of language, but it's something that we can consider just, once again, addressing the issue of having a sensitive design effort.
Exactly.
But I would just be very cautious about saying that we would have a standard type of condition we would apply to lights because they are so very different. And I think even on just the hours, is something that would be different from one school to the next.
Absolutely, and POPs does use that kind of language of context. But we did discover during Williamsburg that you could think of design mitigations before you would consider putting in lights. Good.
And Madam Chair, that was my point. I just wanted a placeholder. So thank you.
Great, wonderful.
And I had another item. I think really it's more geared toward APS. I know that in Discovery, in terms of energy consumption, you have an actual display in Discovery. And the question is, in this school, are you planning to do the same thing, or in schools going forward, are you planning to have a similar display that shows the energy consumption and what is being saved by
We are actually actively looking at utilizing a similar system. We actually have to redo Discovery because of the way the computer worked when that was done versus cloud, the way things are done now. In the cloud, we are actually looking at that, that all schools could have energy modeling or monitoring as part of the curriculum. So we are looking at that. We just, the power purchasing agreement that we've just put in place, we're looking at doing more of that as we go forward, and we want to make sure that all of that can be monitored and used in learning. We're trying to work with teaching and learning on how to fund all of this and how to put all that together, but yes, it's all in process. The Fleet School, we are currently actively looking at how we're going to be doing that and other future projects going forward.
That's great to hear, and especially in light of the first item we had tonight with the community energy plan. I think it's terrific that we bring, make it obvious to both the students in the school and also, the immediate neighborhood how APS is be contributing to the community energy plan.
Well, I think the bottom line is we do look at sustainability. We're trying to look at how can we make our buildings energy efficient. We have to look forward for future managing and running and operating these schools with dollars that may or may not be there as we find out. So we need to find a way to be as efficient as we can with the resources that we have. So we're trying to find every way, and facilities are trying to help with that. The recycling effort and everything else that we're doing that the students are also involved with goes hand in hand with all of the energy.
Thank you.
I just have one follow-up. Is the school meant to be net zero ready or net zero?
It will be net zero ready because
Meaning exactly?
Meaning that we will have it engineered that all we have to do is have a PPA, power purchasing agreement, set up, and they can put the panels on the roof. We just approved the one, and Fleet is going to get panels as it's being constructed right now.
And is that included in the 55 million?
No. No, that's one of the reasons why not, because it's multiple millions to add panels to the roof.
So down the line.
So we have an energy company that provides the panels, gives us a reduced cost energy, and we're actually can be powering it from the panels, but they take the excess energy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else, Commissioner Hughes?
Back onto the existing use permits conditions we have, a question for county staff. How do we preserve access to the playground after school hours for community park uses?
It's wide open. MOA, it's wide open.
Can you just repeat that one more time, Mr. Hughes?
It's a simple question of how do we preserve access to the playgrounds after school hours for the community's use?
It's open.
Well,
Mr. Chambers, I appreciate your comment, and I think it's probably better to say it for the record if you don't mind.
Oh, okay. The site is open. It isn't fenced off.
I understand at the moment there's not a fence, but there was nothing, I think, in the zoning ordinance that would preclude a fence installation at a later date. My point simply is that my understanding is that the uniformity of openness of APS's playgrounds is not necessarily a condition across our entire county, and so I would encourage county staff to consider that in their formation of use permits if they don't already have a comprehensive list of the existing 26 elementary schools and their public access after hours.
Okay.
One thing I would say is, based
Please.
on my understanding and working at Discovery and changes that we want to make, we would have to go for an amendment to our use permit to make any visual changes to the site, which would include fencing.
Okay. Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thinking about the memo that we have with the new standard use permit conditions for APS projects, I think there is interest among some commissioners of discussing them. And I don't know that perhaps other members of PFRC might as well. So perhaps for a PFRC meeting, there could be a meeting about these, and maybe that's the appropriate venue to talk about these and give suggestions, if we could.
Very good. Thank you for that suggestion. If there are no more issues or discussion points with structural changes to use permit conditions and content, let's move on to the capacity question. Commissioner McSweeney, would you like to formulate the question?
Sure, thank you. So we did hear testimony tonight from Mr. Belinsky, who's done some work with, I think, the public information that's available from APS about the potential students for a walk zone. And one of the things I have to say I was struck with as well was the fact that, you know, APS needs more elementary schools. It seems that I think the Facility Advisory Committee has indicated in a paper that there are at least 3 more elementary schools that are needed in the immediate future, given, you know, current capacity issues. So I think it is a very good question that Mr. Belinsky is asking, and that is why did we not build this school to be a little bigger than the 725, and I understand now it's 732. And perhaps in answering that question, you could also talk a little bit about capacity, and certainly in a tight budget time, if APS, if the school board were to add a student to every classroom, say, what that would mean to this particular school if that were done across the board. I mean, today it has a 732 student population, and tomorrow it could be a different number. How does that work exactly?
Come on. Okay, sorry. So as I think Mr. Chambers mentioned earlier, school board policy sets that capacity is generated at 23.3 students per classroom. From a design standpoint, we design the storage units for each individual student's belongings in a classroom for 26 students, because that, from a practical standpoint, that's the criteria that my current understanding is that APS uses before they hire another teacher and go to another class. Increase the number of fifth grade classrooms from 4 to 5, for example. So while the use permit language, and I understand the question in terms of the language of the use permit being tied to a number and being potentially problematic, the school can accommodate up to the 802 or 800 and odd number, I don't have the exact number in the presentation we saw, if you put 26 students in all the classrooms, which the school system would choose to do before they went and put trailers on the site. So from a practical standpoint and in terms of the design capacity that's been provided, that can occur.
And if I could provide a little extra clarity, I think that you've just heard a definition or an explanation as to how they arrive at the design capacity. I just want to remind you that the zoning ordinance actually also limits the design capacity based upon what the school board has approved in the adopted CIP. So it is somewhat of a limiting factor of the zoning ordinance, whereas what was just described by the applicant is absolutely true, is that these schools over time, by reconfiguring interior spaces and changing the per square foot per student, you can get a little bit of additional capacity. However, the zoning ordinance is specific to, that's why we're so clear in the approval of schools, we're setting what that design capacity is, and unfortunately, and as the county board has been dealing with over the last couple of years, every time APS wants to add relocatables or cottages or whatever the current terminology is for outdoor classrooms, or even just interior reconfigurations of spaces that increase the capacity, they're required to get a use permit amendment. But that is something that we're analyzing to see if there's a different way of addressing this so that we're not continuing to come back to reopen that discussion. But it is a limiting factor of the zoning ordinance, which is why we have to get so specific, which doesn't allow for additional growth.
Okay, Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for the applicant. If my memory serves me right, the last time we had an elementary school here, I believe the number was 752 seats for capacity, but today we have either 732 or 729 seat capacity. I don't know which way you want to count it. Could you help me understand the missing 24 seat, or what's it, 21 seats?
Yes. The capacity at Fleet is 752 because it is a county-wide program school. The deaf and hard of hearing is a county-wide element there, and so that increases the capacity over the baseline of 732.
So there's extra classrooms there?
At Fleet, yes, compared to Reed.
Okay. My point to my fellow commissioners is that the difference between 752 and 729 seats, while seemingly insignificant, represents an entire site for a school across our entire county. That's 24 additional schools that aren't built currently to 752 seats. This does cause me a little bit of concern that we're going in the wrong direction for capacity. So I'd like to just make that note for the record.
I think the one thing that I would want to clarify is the way they currently have it set up, I believe it's how many classrooms per grade at this point?
5.
You have 5 classrooms per grade, which sets it up, and then if you add a second program, that's why we have the 725 minimum requirement. And essentially, if we would make a building larger, you would end up having to add, additional classrooms. So you would add a significant amount. It wouldn't just be 25 or 50 kids. It would be a full
140 kids.
Correct.
For each classroom.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. During your analysis of alternatives, were there any proposals that increased the capacity of the site and were able to do so at a cheaper cost?
I don't think there were any that were at a cheaper cost. We did look at an opportunity to maintain the existing Reed building with a pre-K program because it was more set up for pre-K, which is one of the issues we had with the existing building, and building a full building on the site, but we would have ended up probably getting onto the county land as well as the school's land.
Mr. Chambers, just so you know for the record, the 13th of March presentation did have your integrated plan at the time, which is the one we're seeing now, at 56 million, and the standalone, which would have delivered 1,000 students, at 55 million, as you pointed out, the majority being preserved in the 10-year-old LEED Gold building as a pre-K program. Madam Chair, may I have a follow-up?
Yes, please.
Mr. Chambers, are there any pre-K schools currently in the APS system that have trailers located at them? In other words, pre-K classrooms are currently inside of the building, and outside of the building there are 5th grade or 4th grade trailers, or learning cottages, or whatever term we want to use at the moment?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look at our current layout.
I suspect you will find several of them. I won't go through the naming convention for here if you don't mind.
Just clarification, your question is, are there elementary schools in Arlington with trailers?
That is correct.
Oak Ridge has trailers.
Correct, ma'am. That would be one of the examples in which a pre-K program classroom is pressing against a 4th or 5th grader, pushing them out into the trailers or learning cottages, in which we are turning down an opportunity to deliver pre-K classrooms cheaper than our current proposal in front of us.
A further question? Comment?
That was an important comment and question, so I appreciate the opportunity, Madam Chair. Yes, I do have one more question. It's if there's any other capacity questions, I'll kind of let them go if they like any. No? Okay.
It's all right, carry on.
Mr. Chambers, perhaps since you might be the one to best answer this question, have major improvements, and by the term major improvements, let me be very specific, capitalization projects that either completely refresh or add to a school been completed at any of the following schools? Barcroft, since 2008. Are you aware of any?
Commissioner Hughes, I think this may have gone beyond the scope of our discussion tonight.
Fine, Madam Chairwoman, then I would like to make a point to my fellow commissioners. Tonight we plan to propose bulldozing 50% of a 10-year-old LEED Gold building, when the alternative that was analyzed and not brought forward was to deliver cheaper 1,000 students. In other words, more seats for more students at less cost to the Arlington taxpayers. In the time since this building was built brand new, no improvements have been made at Barcroft, Randolph, or Hoffman Boston Elementary School, all of which support pre-K programs, all of which support, I think, Hoffman Boston doesn't have trailers at the moment, and neither does Randolph, but Barcroft does. My point simply is, and I will continue to harp on it, that as we approach site plans, we need to think about our job to advise the county board on land use across the county. And here we are tonight, by default, approving the bulldozing of a 10-year-old LEED Gold building that will deliver less students at more cost than we have reviewed in our analysis of alternatives.
So I would like to ask Commissioner Schroll, who faithfully conducted how many meetings? 7, 8, many, and this issue, whether this issue came up and how the committee thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, Commissioner Hughes was at many of these meetings, so he knows his history well. We did consider as a group 6 options in concept. One was what Commissioner Hughes referenced. It was the standalone scheme. And he and several others thought that it was the preferred scheme. And Commissioner Hughes, to his credit, sticks to his guns and is here advocating for the same thing. That wasn't the sentiment of the majority. 98% of the other folks on both the BLPC and PFRC. So there are always many things to balance. One of them is increased school capacity, meeting that need. There's also, as we heard tonight, the retail needs of the neighboring businesses, open space preservation. There are many needs to balance, and I think the committees tried to do all of that. The other thing that we didn't discuss tonight was the existing Reed School, everybody thought was designed to have another story on top of it. When Wick and his team and APS went back and looked at it, it wasn't designed to do that. And so the committees thought at the outset that we would just build another story on top and then we'd be done. Well, that's not where we landed. And so I think the committees kind of starting from that place were more interested in, yes, knocking down a recently constructed school, but to do all the other things we were discussing tonight. So I can certainly respect your position, Commissioner Hughes. I'm not where you are, but I can certainly respect that position, and others who potentially hold it.
Can this be the last comment on this issue?
It's not a comment, just a factual follow-up question, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Just as a factual follow-up to our architect, I would like to confirm that the existing Reed site building can accommodate at least one story.
Structurally, it could take one additional floor, but you would have to take the roof off in order to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move on now, if we could, to trees, types, and maintenance. I think we did
covered those.
Did we do the tree? Okay.
Thank you.
So let's move on to screening the loading at Madison.
Right. Could we just see one of your slides that, I think you had one in your presentation, I don't remember which number it was, that had the ghosted-in single-family house?
Right there.
Right there, 25. So is this is an accurate representation?
It's not fully rendered. The landscaping buffering is not shown in that rendering.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. What is there between the building, proposed between the building and the house?
Along the property line of the house are evergreen landscaping, and then along the opening for the loading dock are cherry laurels, I believe.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Cherry laurels, I think are what we're calling for on the plan. The loading dock is not gated off because of the issues that you and Mr. Chambers were discussing earlier in terms of the irregularity of deliveries. But it's screened as much as we can to close down. You're looking at the full wide opening, whereas we only need 20 feet to get in there, and that opening you're looking at is probably 60, 65 feet. And you're not seeing any of the landscape in that rendering. One of the site plans should show.
You know,
but it's on the site plans. The screening's on the site plans.
Right. I would just suggest that when you do your presentation for the county board, that it would be helpful to include this slide, but then the one with landscaping in it.
I think Mr. Gibson has a contribution.
I think that you're correct about how to put the presentation together, but if anybody needs reference, on page 26 of the staff report, you can see, granted in a very small scale drawing, you can see the planting buffers. There's 2 rows of planting buffers that are shown.
It's the bigger picture in the color is always a good thing, particularly because I suspect the neighbors will be raising the same questions. So just a suggestion.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. I have one more note for perhaps Ms. Bowling, I think would come under your purview, to make sure that Westover Shopping Center, through perhaps Mr. Lawson, is included in any outreach to the civic associations.
Yeah, we're still discussing the final set of conditions for the use permit for this. So we're going to discuss with APS adding them into the condition language.
Thank you very much. That, I think,
Madam Chairman, I
Yes,
just
please.
have one more thing.
Absolutely.
And Mr. Gibson made me think of it this evening and I had, because I was curious what happened to the school between when it closed in 1984 and then when the library was done. And apparently that is the Learning Center was, the children's school was there almost immediately. And I think we see that in the back of the staff report. I would just suggest to staff that it would be nice in the narrative to fill in between 1984 and 2007 and just put in something that it was a children's school. Since we have all the permits in the back, these staff reports are incredibly useful and incredibly important compendiums of knowledge about all kinds of things. And it's amazing how much we try to reconstruct, well, what happened when? And when there's the opportunity to put it in the staff report, it's great. But there was a Washington Post article from June 21st, 1984 that was the memorial service held for the Walter Reed Elementary School and the lamenting of the loss of the neighborhood school. But I will say that the school board was judicious because it has chosen to retain the property for possible future use instead of turning it over to the county board. So I know that we've often had troubles when we close schools and when we now share land with that, but that was a pretty prescient move.
Well, yay for us. Thank you, Commissioner Giacomini. That adds local color and very helpful. Thank you very much. Are we ready for a motion?
Madam Chair. Before I make a motion, Commissioners, I'm going to be making two motions as a reminder. All right. I move that the Planning Commission find that the proposed character, location, and extent of the elementary school at the Reed School site is substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan.
Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Guerin. Any discussion? Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. As I've previously noted to my fellow commissioners and will continue to do so, in the case of 532 finding, or 5332 findings, 2232, thank you. I always get 2232 findings with respect to the comp plan, both with regard to schools and county facilities. I will continue to abstain for the sole purpose and reason that we do not have a comprehensive plan element in my belief that addresses comprehensively these sites. Such questions would then be able to answer many of the concerns I have with respect to this site, and more importantly, how they relate to sites that are not here.
Thank you for reminding us about that. And so if there are no other comments, questions, all in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? And abstain. So I think we're 9-0-1. Is that right? Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the County Board approve the subject use permit amendment for the renovation and addition project to create a new elementary school at the Reed site with a design capacity of up to 732 students with modifications to parking, height, and setbacks subject to the proposed conditions of the staff report dated October 31st, 2018, and with no further scheduled county board review.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Lantelmi. Discussion? Commissioner McSweeney, Commissioner Lantelmi, Commissioner Hughes.
It would be best to let me go first.
But then I'll defer to that. You may go first. Oh, so okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I plan to offer a substitute motion to the main motion. I move that the Planning Commission recommend the County Board defer action on the elementary school at Reed use permit amendment and request specific analysis of alternatives that do not demolish 50% of a 10-year-old LEED Gold certified building and provide more seats for more students with a savings to the Arlington taxpayer of at least $1 million.
Is there a second?
I'll second it for discussion purposes.
Second by Commissioner McSweeney. Is there discussion? Commissioner McSweeney?
You speak to your motion first?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner McSweeney. I was expecting it to die on the floor, which would have been fine. I would have left my more charring dissent to later this evening. As many of you know, schools and I made my fun times with schools, and it's kind of ironic because it's exactly the reason why I ended up on this commission in the first place. But what's interesting for me, and I think that's incredibly enlightening, is you've heard me talk time and time again at other processes about my deep concern with respect to our process being not necessarily in the whole community neighbor's interest. And I see it most specifically at this site. We're going to pay $4,000 for the privilege of housing 271 fewer students on a site. That's really incredible to think about, and it's not really well advertised. Our community process is a very local neighbor-focused process, and that results can and do end up very perhaps disproportionately impacting our neighbors who may or may not be as well advocates for themselves. I point out that the improvements here will demolish a school built 10 years ago, deliver fewer students at greater cost, and in the same time period, I don't think a dime has been spent on Barcroft, Randolph, or Hoffman, Boston, which is, last time I checked, our most challenged communities with respect to their financing and advocacy. And so to me, what remains important as our comprehensive plan and our entire land use vision is to avoid future disparate impact claims. And I begin to grow increasingly concerned that we are in a process that no longer is beneficial to the entire community. 684 students were built at the addition at McKinley, 729 at Abington, 752 at Fleet, 729 here. I'm happy to know that we attempt to try our best. I just don't know if we're attempting hard enough.
Thank you. Any further comment, discussion? Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. I always appreciate the views of Commissioner Hughes and meet him some part of the way. I don't quite go all the way, but I do appreciate the fact that he is very consistent in bringing up that schools are not part of the comprehensive plan. And I think, of course, we as a commission have raised this many times, and I'm sure we'll do it again in our letter this year. I also am equally troubled that when we have such a need for seats, we have in the last couple of actions not built to the potential capacity of a site. However, this process certainly had a lot of public engagement and went through 14 or 18, I can't remember the exact number, of meetings, and did follow the process that has been laid out. So whether or not that's the process that's getting us to the right place is a different question. So I will be supporting, I will not be supporting your motion, but I will be supporting yours. But I do think there are some, I'm hoping that APS will look at maximizing sites in the future. I think this was a good opportunity to do it here that we've missed. Career Center Working Group has some recommendations for further maximizing that site that I think that I hope APS will take to heart.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
First, I do want to join my Commissioner Schroll's comments earlier this evening about the PFRC BLPC process, which produced this and why. I do want to add that one of the factors that went into this, at least certainly from my, and I participated at the PFRC, is open space. That was a very, very large consideration here, and the potential loss of significant open space by the other alternatives weighed very heavily on the process. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, we do not really count in the dollars and cents for the project the loss of open space. Open space is a premium here in the county. I think some of us here have sort of calculated an acre of open space is essentially it's well over $1 million, a couple million dollars to replace it. But that is not factored in at all to this, the budget of this school. So if we had gone with a different option, we would have lost space. And essentially to replace that space would have cost us, again, millions of dollars. May have come out of a different pocket of our budget, but it is a very real loss for this county to have that. And it is a dollars and cents issue. It just isn't factored in right here, so that gives a false impression of what this costs. So I just wanted to make that point here, and that's partly why I will not be supporting Commissioner Hughes' motion.
Anyone else? I would like to say that I very much appreciate Commissioner Hughes always bringing up the lack of a comp plan element for facilities, for community facilities. I know JFAC is working very, very hard to get us there. I know that there's been staff recently, and I haven't fully read the new work program, but I hope the staff person who will be dedicated to the community facilities work, perhaps Mr. Schreiber, you were shaking your head yes, you don't know. No, it won't be you, but there is a staff person, no, I see, but speaking on behalf of CPHD. So we are slowly struggling toward an element that could respond to your initial concern that you bring up all the time. Having said that, I did go to one PFRC meeting. I was not able to go to others, but, and we can't go to every single meeting for every single thing that we do. So I do rely on the chair, the community discussion, the emphasis that is placed on various components. I wanted to say that I was really impressed with the design of these buildings as they kind of fit together in a village feel to me. I did want to just put that out there. I'm not sure with this motion or the one to come. And it surprises me because design by committee is often frowned upon, but in this case, the result that I see is really very good. But I will not be supporting the motion itself because I think the majority, a supermajority of the people who worked the issue felt otherwise. So, having said that, if there are no more comments, I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor of the substitute motion? 1. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the rest of us. Got it. And no abstentions. Commissioner Lantelmi.
I'd like to offer an amendment to the main motion, if that's possible.
Yes, yes.
I'd like to make my motion, which would be to add an ADA-compliant pedestrian path to Washington Boulevard, consistent with the budget and physical site constraints.
Second. Any discussion? Questions? Discussion. Commissioner McSweeney.
I actually have a question.
Question.
I thought I had heard that that was already being done. So I'm curious as to why you made the motion, or did I misunderstand?
This would be consistent with the Transportation Commission's amendment.
Oh, this is the Transportation Commission's amendment?
Similar, yes.
Could we have applicant respond, perhaps?
Or Mr. Gibson, perhaps, may have said it earlier?
So we were stating that we continue to recommend that, and that the applicant has not agreed to it.
Thank you. I did misunderstand you.
So then it's appropriate to consider a motion like that. Any further questions, discussion? If not, all in favor? I think we're unanimous. I'll call for, yes, got it? Opposition, abstention, none. So it's 10-0-0 in favor of the amendment to the main motion. Any further amendments to the main motion on the table, which is Commissioner Schroell's motion?
I have no amendment to the main motion, but I do have a motion to make after that. I just wanted to mention.
You have the floor.
No. We need to finish out this motion
Didn't we
first.
vote on it just now?
No, we voted on the amendment.
His amendment to the main motion.
Yeah, I didn't want us to move on beyond that.
Your amendment.
No, it's not an amendment. I just wanted to clarify, I have a different motion after we vote on.
Okay, so we're ready to vote on the main motion as amended? Oh, sorry, Commissioner Weir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a comment, and that is that I think that we are in a position where whenever there is any sort of public facility built, the default assumption is that there will be surface parking, and then maybe or maybe not there is a push, like what happened at Fleet, in order to make some sort of consensus possible to, as an alternative, go with some sort of structured or underground parking. And I think that in this county, that is exactly the opposite assumption. And it is my hope that we, as quickly as possible, get to the point where any designs or drawings or plans or presentations or requests for a 2232 or a site plan for public land come in having first made the assumption that there will be no surface parking, and then when surface parking is proposed, to have justified their departure from what should be the default assumptions given the constraints and the various considerations that this county is facing in the future. So I will be supporting the main motion, but I can see a trajectory in my own thinking where very shortly I will be finding that surface parking, unless it is affirmatively justified, is inconsistent both with the comprehensive plan and inconsistent with our various site permitting requirements.
What would an example of an affirmative justification for surface parking be then, so I can understand your point of view?
I would like to see an argument made, for instance, that the existing surface parking in this place combined with various market incentives, with pay for parking that is accompanied by an increase in compensation for that site, that some various combination of different incentives and packages, or TDM, be put in place to recognize that while parking may appear scarce, the decision to make it less scarce at the expenditure of open space is also inappropriate. What it would look like, I think that is a question better put to creative applicants, to be candid. But I think that we need to start saying that we're not going to just be giving up green space to surface parking, given the circumstances that we're facing. That the default assumption has to be reversed. So I'm just sort of planting that flag. I will be supporting this motion.
As amended?
As amended, but you know, I feel like we need to start thinking about things a little bit differently.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Now are we ready for Commissioner Iacomini?
I would just like to say that I had contemplated offering an amendment to the main motion concerning the at 7A and adding in a designee from the Westover Shopping Center to be part of those consulted under the community liaison. But since Ms. Bowling indicated that that discussion is still being had, I will not offer that amendment.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion, comments, motions, amendments? If not, we're voting on the main motion as articulated by Commissioner Schroll as amended. All in favor? Not yet?
Sorry, Commissioner. Just for the record, my intentions are to vote no on the main motion, and I think they're well articulated in my substitute motion and the speech associated with that. So
we appreciate it. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Abstention? Very good. Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. Recognizing that APS and the county have budgetary constraints and rising enrollment in schools across the county, and recognizing that funds spent on creating parking at schools takes funding away from educating our county's children, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the County Board join with APS to direct the Joint Committee for Transportation Choices, JCTC, to prioritize a comprehensive independent parking study to identify more flexible and creative ways to provide parking at our county's schools, prioritizing those school sites slated for development during the current CIP period, but ultimately encompassing all school sites.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Weir. Discussion? Commissioner Hughes.
Commissioner McSweeney, I will join you in supporting this motion, although I must be clear that the time period between the implementation of those sites most slated for development and every neighbor is absolutely paramount. When we talk about the public right-of-way, we must remember that the public right-of-way remains the public right-of-way of all. And while we did win a Supreme Court case, I think in the 1970s, with respect to the Crystal City residential parking plans and the goals of environmental stewardship, I think that if a uniform approach was accepted by all neighbors in Arlington, it would be a wonderful thing.
Thank you for your comment. Any further discussion, comments? If not, all in favor of the motion? You have complete support. I'll just call for opposition and abstention. Seeing none, it's unanimous. That's unanimous. Commissioner Schroll.
If anybody has any other motions, if not, I want to thank APS staff. I want to thank Rob Wick for your work. Arlington County staff was great. Rob, thanks for filling in tonight. You did a great job. Nicole, you as well. Also want to thank the folks who aren't other staff members, Michelle Stahlhut and Brett Wallace and Chris Kreider, who have been working on this project as well and aren't here this evening. So, and also the folks in the community that worked on this project, and my counterpart Hans Baumann. So I think this was one of the more positive public processes we've had, and one of the ones where everybody seemed to be rowing in the same direction for pretty much the entire time, which I think was new to see and was good to see, and it was a positive process. So and an encouraging one. So thank you all, and thanks for staying late with us tonight. Thanks again.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Schroll, and thank you for all your hard work. We have one item on our agenda and a business meeting on Friday. Yes, Friday is something else for me. Wednesday. So we are in recess until then. Thank you very much. I was 10. Yeah.